Skyrim, A Sorcerer's Tale by Rastislav. Chapter 441. Chapter 60. A Special Breed of Knife Ear. Raven's point of view earlier. For what felt like the millionth time, I found myself cursing my childish arrogance as the far too violent energies of a god's damned death mountain attempted to turn me into soul slush and use me as a snack. Oh yeah, Raven, just piggyback an Ascension off a ritual. What could possibly go wrong? It felt like a decade had passed as I sat there in the storm of ash, even if I knew intellectually that it had only been minutes, most of my thoughts and reasoning crushed utterly by the constantly surging waves of power ever so inexorably threatening to turn me into so much broken memory. But I was a stubborn and spiteful little bastard, not to mention a rather brilliant one at that. My preparations stopped me from getting shredded and bought me time to get my shit together. My power and divinity gave me the ability to interact with the raging winds, and my shroud, that beautiful piece of art, protected my soul even now. It started slow, but soon I found myself funneling the energies of the ritual to where they were supposed to go. A few grooves in the ground, incapable of accomplishing such a complex action, no matter how powerful. All the while, I hoped against hope that Kine wouldn't bail on me. Because for all my preparations and planning, all that energy had to go somewhere, and while I would certainly take a lot for my own purposes, far too much remained to simply be shunted back into the mountain to explode a few centuries later. So the obvious choice was to redirect it into blessing the land instead of cursing it. Which is why I yoinked an Eldergleam branch after offering the proper prayers and bonking the almighty wind mommy into awakening with my infantile divinity. All in all, it took me a few hours and a teleport. It was super easy, barely an inconvenience. My internal sarcasm must have registered as some kind of prayer, because after an unknowable amount of time, I finally felt a connection flickering, and in the turbulent whirlwind that was the ash currently surrounding me, I felt a surge of fresh air, like a morning breeze carrying with it the smell of spring dew. It made my very soul feel awake. Another influence soon joined, destructive yet nurturing. Then came the sun, gentle yet life-giving, with a distinct sense of, you better not fuck this up, I don't want to time-snap this place. Followed soon by a trio of gazes of whom two hesitated before getting dragged in by the third, and I felt magic stir and my determination be bolstered, and all of this be covered behind a veil of web so that no other could join in. Feeling the shift in the air, my blood that was not blood burned in anticipation, and another surge of power struck me. This time aiming to join me and not the mountain, and now instead of being shredded, I felt all of myself bloat beyond reason. Gritting teeth I did not have, I held on for dear life and slowly began noticing change taking place. There was something there, at the edge of my vision, beckoning me to look at it and promising an infinity and beyond. If only I were to reach out, but I held back. That way led to ego death, and I would have none of its poisoned gifts. Take your chim and shove it. Layer after layer smacked into me, but the fact I knew my plan was working bolstered my confidence with each passing second, giving me just enough grit to keep going, even as my soul began to ache. I only faltered for a moment when I felt the idiot bird join me, my worry overpowering me for but a moment and nearly getting me crushed before I once more grit my proverbial teeth and focused on surviving. He was on his own for now. Finally, after what felt like decades of being too little butter spread onto too much bread, I felt the ritual complete and the power shift in nature, bursting our in-waves upon waves of distinctly positive energies as it did. I almost felt sorry for any undead hanging about. The air stilled, all my sight still covered in ash for a long quiet moment before my ego reasserted itself and I felt the ash surge back toward a central point, toward me. And with an almost audible snap, my eyes opened. Never have I felt quite so alive. So much so that, as was tradition at this point, I began laughing, the noise coming straight from the soul as I felt like a weight had been lifted from my everything. The numerous influences constantly bothering me, retreating from the greater being that now took the elf's place. Naturally, the world decided this was the perfect time to bring me back into reality. Quest completed. Ow! Something smacked me in the head far too hard and immediately grabbed the book, that was for whatever reason deposited right above my head. This is when another voice joined my own, mission passed, respect plus, and was promptly smacked in the head by said book. Oi, what the fuck, Pops? Scorch squawked as the book disappeared into my inventory. What the fuck were you thinking? I turned to the bird and am momentarily stunned by just how bright and vibrant his flames were and how peaceful the air around him was. Naturally, I ignore all that and immediately flick a pebble at his stupid head. Do you have any idea how risky that was? Uh-huh. He deadpans. If you die, I die, dumbass. We've been over this. Which wouldn't be an issue since I had everything under control. I point at him. He just stares at me blankly and repeats, uh-huh. I poke him in the head, much to his dismay. I poke, had poke, everything. Poke under, poke control. He pecks my finger, only for his beak to simply pass through it, as if it were moving through loose ash, the digit reforming the instant the obstruction disappeared. Both of us stare at what just happened for a good 10 seconds. Huh. You feel that? He asks. Nope. I shrug. He pecks my hand this time, causing much the same result. Well now, neat. Neat, he deadpans, that is all you have to say. The fuck do you expect me to do? I ask, squee like a little girl. Do it, bitch, is his instant reply. No. Coward, he chirps, huffs. Rolling my eyes, I shift the topic. You also seem to have changed. His little eyes widen and he starts checking himself out before seemingly not noticing anything different and then closing said eyes, which then snapped open in what almost looked like panic. And, I ask as I lean at the tree behind me, right, that was now a thing. He stares at his wing for a long moment before letting out a chirpy laugh. Oh, I am all sunfire now. Got a blessing from Oriel too. Neat, I repeat with a shit-eating grin. He makes the closest approximation to a growl a bird is capable of and glares at me. All right, you twat. Check your notifications before I blow myself the fuck up. Fine. I definitely do not whine at my procrastination being discovered so easily. Raven of Great House Dagoth. Age 21. Race, Dunmer, Ashen Ilnofe. Fireblood. Heart of the Mountain. Once its child, now its master, you are of Red Mountain, and now it too is of you. Complete immunity to fire, immense control over fire, immensely empowered fire magic. You do not die, and are merely banished to the heart chamber upon defeat. Lorcan's Blood. Lorcanson, a true demigod and kin to the Aedra, acknowledged by Lorcan and blessed by his domains, your first Kalpa awaits, O child of the trickster. Raven's Reticence, upgrade. Freed from such petty limitations as emotional filters, you may now use your power at will and even bless those following you with enough skill. Ashen Constitution. Ash forms all that is you in the physical world, granting immunity to most mortal troubles and a great resistance to most damage. You must be crushed both physically and mentally before being banished. You may retain the use of your mortal functions at will. STR 85, 110. Dex 90, 115. Vit 121, 250. Mind 126, 250. Mag 2150, 5000, 25,000. Div 100, 1000. Greater aspects, anti-outsider, Ash plus. Lesser aspects, mortality, defiance, deceit, fire, plus, life plus. Ashen Bond. Sunfire Bond, the Solar Hawk having ingested the energies of Red Mountain as it was being blessed by Oriel himself, has drawn upon that blessing and ascended to the status of a nascent phoenix. Eternity awaits. All I can do as I finish reading through is stop myself from descending into another bout of giggles. If the mere feeling made me finally loosen up and relax, then reading it was like getting a divine ordainment that all would be well if I didn't fuck up massively. It was so very liberating. So, the bird appears in front of me. Did it work properly? Let's just say Mehrunes' joke is no longer completely inaccurate. I chuckle. The Altmer are going to throw such a fucking fit. Both of us spend a moment imagining their expressions. Snapping my fingers, I turn fully to him. "Oh, and you are a baby phoenix now, congratulations." He stares at me for a while before his beak curls ever so slightly neat. I kick him into the tree and he dematerializes with a squawk. Disrespectful little shit. I snort and get up, my movements feeling so effortless and swift, a normal person wouldn't even notice me get up. Patting myself down and confirming that my equipment did indeed survive and wasn't about to fall through me like the most horrific scenario my mind came up with, I smiled and left the little indent in the tree. Though calling it a tree would be rather boring, I mutter, and look up at the majestic new heart of the mountain, feeling a connection with it almost as intimate as the one I had with Scorch. Gah, whack, magma gleam. I frown. No, that is too lazy. Mounting gleam. Does it even have to have Guilm in the name, though? Fire gleam? A familiar voice purrs into my ear, not surprising me one bit. Simple is best, sometimes dear. I turn around and come face to face with the trio of Daedra who sent me here. Fire gleam it is. I shrug and smirk. What brings you three wonderful ladies to my new heart chamber? Mephala smirks back, but lets Azura speak first. You. She narrows her eyes, seemingly looking for any reason to disparage me or lessen my achievement. But not even the little shit I was could make Azura deny the blessing I just gave her people, and she knew it well. Taking an unnecessary breath, the Lady of Dusk and Dawn spoke. You have accomplished the task given to you, and while your irreverence is… Mephala clears her throat, the causing Azura to momentarily close her eyes, grating. She goes on, it cannot be denied that you have gone well and truly beyond of what was asked of you. I am glad to have proven myself. I offer her a flamboyant bow, though I admit the walk was a bit unnecessary. Do not try and dance around me with words, child. Azura narrows her eyes. I know well that you used the time to further your goals. Not a word leaves me as I just keep smirking at her. Finally done with her posturing, she sighs. Very well, and I feel a by now familiar touch of foreign power. No strings shall be attached, my child. Bear your reward with pride. Don't mind if I do. I grin and feel Azura's blessing join the many others. Blessing of Dusk and Dawn boosts mysticism and magicka regeneration control. She doesn't bother speaking further and steps back. I had her begrudging respect, but she didn't suddenly start enjoying my presence. Boethia now stands at the head of their little trio, and for once her expression isn't severe, but is instead one of pride as she looks down at me with a barely contained grin. When I spoke to Veloth and showed him the Sigic path, I fully expected none would ever achieve it. Cunt, I snort. She stops containing her grin. Consider me pleasantly surprised, then, that instead of a coward hiding behind borrowed power and poor humor, stood someone bold enough to achieve what you just did. She waves her hand, and I feel another blessing take hold. Use your power as you will, you have certainly earned it. Minor blessing of the warrior. Boethia's blessing, increased mastery of all things warfare. Forgot I even had that one. Our priests will tell all of the trinity of blessings you now bear. Azura speaks again, do not misuse such authority. And with that, the two of them disappear without another word, leaving behind only Mephala. So, I spread my arms as if to present the sight behind me. How do you like the new place? Very traditional Bosmery. She grins teasingly. I deflate in an instant. Fuck, it really is, isn't it? Oh, there. She appears next to me and pats my shoulder. Your Deathfire tree is much better than the Valenwood, I assure you. Much less hungry for its inhabitants, too. I am calling it that out of spite, I grumble, and her smile practically sparkles. Accepting the inevitable defeat, I ask, so happy with your scheme? I am sure I have no idea what you are talking about. She covers her mouth with a hand. Why would I, the terrible murderous webweaver, ever organize such a convoluted series of events just to save my favorite pack of mare? Cupping my chin, I narrow my eyes. False modesty doesn't suit you. And authority suits you. She purrs back and leans onto me and whispers silkily into my ear, how about we celebrate your ascension? Crossing my arms with a huff, I give her a pointed look. Yes, I am well aware of your mortal hang-ups, dear, but you need to let a woman hope. She raises her hands in faux surrender and smirks coyly before turning to leave. Not without looking back one final time, though. I am not worried, though, after all. An edge of pure mania and obsession enters her gaze. We now have all the time in the world. And with a pop, she is gone. Suddenly feeling just a tiny bit worried, I find myself staring at her previous spot for a few seconds too many. Long enough for Scorch to materialize atop my shoulder with a glint in his eyes. Would. I facepalm. Authors. Note, a full updated stat line for your perusal. Raven of Great House Dagoth. Race, Ashen Elnofe. Age 21. STR 110. Dex 115. Vit 250. Mind 250. Mag 5,000, 25,000. Division, Item. Greater Aspects, Anti-Outsider, Ash. Lesser Aspects, Mortality, Defiance, Deceit, Fire, Life. Skills, Mage, Destruction Master, Elemental Malleability. Restoration Expert, Alteration Master. Conjuration Expert. Summons List, Scorch, Shackled Reach, Skittering Swarm, The Changed Ones 13/50. Mysticism Master, Sight Beyond Sight. Illusion Master, Psionics. Enchantment Master, Dwemer Tech Master. Potioncraft Adept, Expert Tongue. Warrior, Sword Expert. Pole Expert, Dagger Expert. Thief, Adept Sneak. Abilities, Ancestral Summon, Racial. Magnus's Gaze, Divine Blessing. Traits, Heart of the Mountain, Indestructible Phylactery bound to the tower that is Red Mountain. Fire immunity up to and including supernatural flames, immense increase to both fire control and power. Lorcanson, Divinity Source, Domains of Lorcan. Raven's Reticence, Expression of Divinity, power in tune with your magicka. It works best against outsiders such as Aedra or Daedra. May be used to grant blessings. Ashen Constitution, Lesser Invulnerability. Sunfire Bond, Scorch, Nascent Phoenix. All-Seeing Third Eye, Greater Dunmer Paragon, Greater Falmer Paragon. Honored Nordic Paragon, Unbound, Dover Thur. Mephala Blessing, Chosen. Deceit. Kind's Blessing, Healing. Mehrunes Blessing, Destruction. Auriel Akatosh's Blessing, Time and Sun. Zenithar's Blessing, Crafting. Azura's Blessing, Mysticism. Boethia's Blessing, Warfare. Equipment. Sharmat's Reach, the pinnacle of Tamrielic craft. These rings are enough for one to declare themselves a sorcerer king by the simple virtue of wearing them. Eyehold, channeling the Eye of Magnus is twice as efficient. Aetherius Descended, Quintuples. Magicka Reserves without limitation. Untouchable, violently distorts space once the bearer is sufficiently threatened. Dragonfell Amulet, the bane of time spirits and their progenitors, provides the bearer with immense resistance to temporal effects. Vestments of the Blasphemer, vestments of Dagoth, the greatest of his line. Highly protective and comfortable, they are made in such a way that they shall remain the same forevermore without any need for maintenance. Blasphemy Unbound, channels and guides the bearer's divinity in a far more controlled and efficient fashion. Can only be worn by one of Dagoth's blood. Heavy-layered ebony plate mail, weightless. Provides 10 times the normal regeneration of magicka. Absorbs spells of immense potency, up to 500 magicka per second. Ethereal Escape, transforms the bearer into their soul form, slows time, and grants immense speed in case of grave danger or injury. Mercy's End transfers the effect of the blade attached onto spells, excluding Rulebreaker. War Crown of Kogaroon, a crown fit for a lord among sorcerers, infused with the soul of an ancient necromancer. Queen of Divine Blood, this crown is one that even Daedra would covet. Royal Guard, satisfies the magicka needs of up to 26 powerful bound creatures on its own. Draconic Aspect, the tiny strand of Akatosh's power empowers the wearer's voice, while at the same time allowing for greater Thuum to be used without risk. Draconic Defenses, resist all damage, 10%. Dread Aura, all shall bow. The Blade of Blasphemy, a blade once carrying the sun's radiance, now usurped by mortal hands, It shall forever carry the taint of such a deed. Vorpal blade, the smallest cut becomes grievous injury. Bane of undead, a mere touch destroys all but the strongest of undead. Rule breaker, no binding survives the strike of this weapon. The Shroud of Raven, an item not meant for mortal hands, yet one made by them, none may observe the bearer against their will while they are covered in its silken grasp. Self-repairing, soul-bound, intangible, eternal. Light Eater, the shroud will consume anything that might make the bearer noticeable, whether it be light or sound, in such a way as to make physically detecting the bearer near impossible. Hallowed seclusion. Any kind of metaphysical sense is blocked completely. From mere magic sight to conceptual detection, not even death itself will find the bearer while hidden under the shroud. Soul Shroud. The bearer's soul is intangible to all and cannot be interacted with without their express permission. Oriel's bow. The sun shall burn away the wicked. All arrows loosed from this bow deal massively increased damage against any creature which might be considered dark or wicked. The effect is further increased if the arrows are properly sun-hallowed. The Mortal's Razor. Life Drinker steals life force in an almost perfect ratio and stores it for later use. Spider's Own Lyre grants power over all lies, allowing an extremely minor form of reality manipulation with enough life force used. Destruction Incarnate. All strikes which may be considered as critical activate a surge of conceptual destruction, doing immense damage and ignoring all defenses. Ambition Incarnate. This weapon is capable of doing damage to anything and everything. Unstitchable. Wounds caused by this weapon are far harder to heal. Surge greatly improves the wielder's ability to channel vast quantities of magicka. Void's Blink. Even while chained, the Void desires to slay and destroy all. Reveals the weakest points, anything from physical to outright conceptual, granting the bearer the chance to strike down anything with enough preparation. Chapter 4, 142, Chapter 61, of Death and Chim. My steps were as childish skips as I stepped out of the heart chamber, or was it tree chamber now? Not important. As I was saying, I was feeling both literally and metaphorically reborn as I left the core of the mountain. That ephemeral childish glee we all lost upon growing old and cynical, burning within my heart without the smallest indication of ever disappearing. Truly, I felt like nothing could possibly bring my mood down. Which is why when I stepped past a silent Akulakan and came upon the scene of a carnage, I felt my right eye twitching violently and my fingers curling into a by now instinctual spellcasting stance. Savos was leaning against a wall, looking mostly fine, but tired. Ulthis was unconscious but breathing. Massanor looked half-burned to a crisp but still alive. Krala was clutching at what looked to be a recently healed stomach wound, and Viren looked oddly untouched. An unfamiliar elf was also present, and while the well and truly brained corpse below him did draw some of my attention, my gaze was focused elsewhere. The bodies of Masur, Vemris, Azra, and Anandor neatly stacked next to each other, none of them breathing. My slowly building fury was only increased a moment later by the sight of the souls of the fallen ascending into the afterlife the instant they saw me walk in. My newly formed connection to Azura cluing me in on the trio's feelings of goals accomplished and a life well given. Anandor's soul still lingered though, his sworn duty and comparatively far stronger essence still keeping him bound to his disgustingly poisoned body. Without bothering to acknowledge the voices of those yet standing, I summoned Surge in my right hand and created a bright golden runic circle under the Falmer's body, dumping the vast majority of my newly increased magicka pool into the spell before metaphysically clutching at his fallen form and pulling. The whole room was blinded with brilliant gold, and for a moment I felt like the spell would fail. But then Scorch decided to butt his head in and added his own new brand of healing magic into the process, practically overcharging the entire thing with a comparatively insignificant amount of energy. A singular pulse of immense power passed through the tunnel, moving not a single grain of dust, yet invigorating all the souls touched by it, leaving behind a silence so complete even the lava flows felt as if they were holding their breaths. The quiet was shattered by a sharp intake of breath as a reborn farmer reflexively sat up, his temporarily golden eyes widening as they met with my own, before he understandably lost consciousness. Restoration expert Ashas. Ma. Not now. With an internal sigh, I turned to the rest of the band, most of whom were looking at me like I had just grown a second head, before then growing a third, just to spite them, and a final figure I did not recognize staring at me with amusement. He felt off. Savos approached me almost hesitantly, giving the now breathing Falmer a hesitant look before turning back to me, Raven. Veyrin also ran up to us after checking on Kralor, but he remained reverently silent. Gramps, I answered back, even as Scorch leapt from my shoulder and began healing everyone involved. What exactly happened here? I believe I could explain that best, young Dagoth. The unknown elf cut in, his bulky form clad in enchanted Dwemer plate engraved with an aged Redoran emblem, approaching me with confidence. Io, hold up, is that Sunder? My eyes briefly flickered to the hammer dangling off his belt before I met his eyes. Let's see here. Mohawk, check. A tool of Kagranak, check. Flesh that was alive, yet not imbued with inactive corpus, check. And finally enough potions in his belts and pouches to drown a city, check. Quite. I deadpan at the Mer, suddenly feeling a bit confrontational. Awfully convenient for you to show yourself now, isn't it, O Moon and Star? Naturally, that little revelation had the rest of the Dunmer present catching their breaths. Veyrin looked like he was about to start foaming at the mouth as his eyes danced between him and me. Nerevar Reborn rose a curious eyebrow. What gave me away? The potions, I deadpan. He frowned in confusion for a moment before looking down at his kit and glancing back up with... Was that embarrassment in his eyes? The emotion disappeared right after, though as the big Mer chuckled, I did not think that part of my reputation still survived. It didn't, I smirk and refuse to elaborate. Now tell me what happened. He frowned at my commanding tone and crossed his arms, but did not protest it. My absence from Morrowind in the past 2 centuries wasn't on a whim. Lady Azura was not content with one of the tribunal disappearing, and I was tasked with chasing him down. Vivek. My eyes snapped to the corpse, its identity rather obvious now. So it was him watching us then. I would ignore the fact Azura found hunting down an enemy of hers more important than governing a recovering nation. That way lie massive headaches, and I was already aware of her hypocrisy beforehand. No point getting caught up in things I could not change easily. He turns back to the body with a disgusted twitch on his upper lip. Yes, you have my apologies for using you as bait, but when I was informed of your ploy, I felt it best to lure the fool in and ambush him. Without bothering to ask permission, I turned to Akulakan. Pack him up, the corpse might be useful. Nerevar, or the Nerevarine, whichever really, merely stood there and watched, apparently unbothered by his loot being taken. Seeing my curious gaze, he shrugged. I did use you as bait. It is only fair the families of the fallen be given the greatest spoils. You are making it very hard to remain pissed at you, I grumbled, much to his amusement. Still, I can agree that it was a worthy sacrifice to catch the fucker in the open. A shame 3 of them died, but he did catch us while I was busy. Speaking of busy, Savos cuts in, curiosity practically burning in his eyes. Did you succeed? Gramps, I deadpan at him. If I failed, you'd know. He chuckles at that, indeed. Shaking his head, he unclasps the lantern on his belt and tosses it at me. I place it on its rightful place without a word. Dagoth seemed distinctly adamant about remaining silent, and I wasn't about to force him to speak. Nerevar's eyes followed the lantern, but he did not comment and instead focused on the matter at hand. So you succeeded then, you removed the curse from the land. At my nod, he closed his eyes, fitting that its creator ended with it then. Speaking of uncursing the land, I speak up with eyes slightly narrowed. I hope you aren't going to be making a scene about me taking your position, because trust me, I am not about to bow and scrape just because you are an old fart. He seemed nearly taken aback by my crass words, and the poor Indoril priest looked halfway to a heart attack. But Nerevar just shook his head. Your house always was ambitious. Do not worry, I will not be stealing your hard work. even if some would prefer I did. Yes, which is why your identity will be remaining secret. I inform him while also directing a pointed look at the priest. I do not need traditionalists grumbling at me while I remove the idiocy from our culture. A single raised eyebrow is his response. You sound awfully certain of yourself there, child. But before I can retort, he raises a placating hand. Your hostility is unnecessary. I have neither the desire nor inclination to undermine you. My time has long since passed, and you are right that our people need a new goal to strive for instead of clutching desperately at what once was. Feeling a bit miffed with my own behavior, I exhale. Apologies, part of me is furious at the very idea of my plans being derailed at this point. It isn't anything personal. He chuckles good-naturedly. The weight of responsibility is a great one to bear. Both my lives have taught me this lesson well. Thus satisfied with our initial meeting, I soon had the remnants of the group packing up and moving out. The unconscious forms of Ulthis, Anondor and Massanor, carried by Akulakan and Kralor. As we began our descent, though, I stepped back a bit, allowing for all but Savos to pass me by and holding my grandfather back. Without a word, I lay my hand on his shoulder and sent out a clear burst of my divine power. Just as silently, I left him standing there with a smirk, the Archmage's eyes bulging to the point of nearly falling out of his face as he felt the distinct sensation of a blessing taking hold. Halfway on our trek to Kogaroon, the old Hortator drew my attention with a subtle wave, and the two of us found ourselves at the back of the column. He did not waste time on preambles and spoke. You did something to yourself while cleansing the land, did you not? My eyes narrowed almost instinctively, but I quickly held that back. What of it? I will not judge you for seeking power. The gods know I did much the same. He pats my shoulder lightly in assurance. I am merely curious. As you were drawing on such power, did you? He pauses. Did you feel a pull? A greater power calling for you? Ah, so that is what he was on about. I did, I nod. The intensity of his look increases to the point I thought he was trying to stare straight into my soul. Did you take it? He nearly hisses. Of course not, I deadpan. I am ambitious, not stupid. He nearly flinches at my dry condemnation of the idea before looking ahead and shaking his head. It is good that our descendants surpass us in wisdom. He sighs. I was not as wise as you when the time came. It was one of the reasons my reincarnation was made possible. Chim. I voice for him. Indeed. He sighs. That accursed word. We walk silently for a bit before I say, all I know of the power is that it bends reality to the whims of the wielder trough, a rejection of said reality. A rather dangerous thing for one's sense of self. An accurate if incomplete description. He states, it is existing while being incapable of even imagining anything you do has consequence or meaning beyond the goal you have set for yourself. I shiver at the mere thought of it, a terrifying way to live. You don't know the half of it. He nods with utter certainty. The day I was finally rid of it all was the day I lived for the first time in thousands of years. In fact, calling it a way to live is a falsehood. It is existence without substance. What kept you tied to it? I ask after a silent moment. Azura. He pointedly does not add any bitterness into his tone. She felt my existence the greatest punishment for those that betrayed me and tied my connection to Chim to the goal of ousting them from power. As cruel as one might expect, which inevitably led you to going after Dagoth I add. Yes. He agrees. I hated your ancestor to the core, you know. I feel the lantern on my belt vibrate. I could not complete my task without slaying him, but he was too powerful to easily slay. Nerevar admits, it was a cruel cycle I was placed in, reincarnating, training up, charging the mountain, only to be slain in an instant over and over again. He chuckles bitterly. My emotions had completely disappeared by the fourth time, meeting the same people, accomplishing the same deeds, arming myself with the same weapons. Everything became so utterly meaningless. Well, shit. You mentioned my reputation for abusing alchemy, so you probably know of this. He smirks slightly. I would drown myself in cheap concoctions before every battle. So emotionless was I that I simply ignored my body's desire to expel what was by that point poison to the senses. He shakes his head. Instead, I kept going and kept consuming. He stops, causing me to do the same. The day I slew your grandfather and retained the mortality of my existence, I spent weeping. Even as my patron looked down at me with disdain, his eyes narrow and his posture turned so command, I almost felt like saluting on instinct. Instinct I did not have. So, child, he speaks, no matter how tempted, no matter how necessary you may feel it, never. He pokes my chest, never synchronize with Chim. Raising my hands in mock surrender, I assure him I wasn't ever planning on it. Good. He nods and we both start walking, like nothing happened. Now tell me of Alduin's coming and the Oblivion crisis. Azura's task left me little time to listen to tales and rumors. I did so with pleasure. Our return to Kogarun was met with great fanfare, even if Dagoth Althis spent most of that time fretting over his slowly awakening son, and the parents of the fallen came to take their children for burial. None of them judged me for it, but sorrow rarely left one in a celebratory mood. I did my best to show my appreciation and loudly announced the deeds of the fallen and my commendation of their lives. Anandor awoke a bit after our arrival, and while the Falmer looked stoic on the outside as he offered thanks and reaffirmed his oaths to me, now adding, to the death and beyond it, to his wording, he was too shaken by his fall to truly speak of it, and I left him to recover his mind and soul. Hours later, all that could be were healed up for the feast though, and the night and following day were spent in grand merriment. My declaration of the land's revival effectively validating the faith of every subject of mine present, and they wasted no time in bringing out every vintage they possessed to celebrate. It was within such loud jubilation that I found my way to a silent Massanor, who sat at the edge of the square, atop one of the stairs leading up to Kogaruan the fortress. Wordlessly, I sat next to him and offered him a bottle of Dagoth brandy. He said nothing as he downed the whole damned thing and carefully placed the pot next to him. We remained silent for a while longer, and he seemed almost surprised I even bothered wasting time on his sorrow. I could practically taste his judgment of himself as he spoke up. Was it worth it? Instead of answering, I placed a hand on his shoulder and shared with him a scryed vision of Vardenfell, clear of ash. What do you think? He was silent as he looked at the, to him, alien sight, merely nodding a full minute later and raising another drink to his dead brother. The following dawn found us holding a short parade through the underground settlement, a full 400 heavily armored volunteer warriors marching after me as I declared my intent in reaching Aldrune and meeting with the Ashlander tribes. One of the leaders sounded a horn, and the gates to the outside world were opened before us. And so, with certainty in our steps and wonder in our eyes, House Dagoth marched across Vardenfell restored. Chapter 4, 143, Chapter 62, Hortator. General P.O.V., Vassala of the Erebenim Sun, the Ashkan of that self-same tribe of proud warriors and protectors, found himself standing at the edge of Aldrune for the third morning in a row, his eyes still unused to the sight of lands bereft of their curse. Rolling rocky hills replaced dunes of ash. Clear skies of blue overtook endless grey, and a pleasant morning breeze caressed his face and beard, not the deathly ash winds that once threatened to take his eyes and skin. It felt like all his life had been a bad dream, and he was now finally awake. His almost meditative observation was ruined when a voice reached him from behind. "Thought I'd find you here." Holding back an annoyed grumble, Vassala turned to his visitor, Abasel. He gave the Urshilaku a curt nod and then faced his companion, Hag. Rawia the wise woman scoffed, "The land is as blessed as the very heavens, and yet you remain a sour little shit." Her eyes shone with snide mockery. "Why am I not surprised? Please have your lovers spat where others cannot see it." The scratchy voice of Ashkan Rassidor of the Ana Musa cut their spat off, the ancient Mer sounding downright youthful, as he did for the past days. "You ruin our people's blessing with your bickering." Rawia turned oddly silent at the venerable elf's command, and Vassila felt compelled to do much the same. "What a merry little band we make." The ever-slimy voice of Gilor of the Zainab joined them, the merchant chief grinning widely as all eyes went to him. Rejoice, my friends, for my scouts have just come back with news. He rubbed his hands eagerly. Come now, my friend. Abasel clapped him on the back. Tell us what they found. Barely keeping himself from being bawled over, the merchant winced. No need to be so aggressive, you whippersnapper. Not all of us are made of rock. That, or you are just particularly weak. Vassala crossed his arms and scoffed. Up yours, Ashhead. The merchant flipped him off and promptly preempted any retort. My boys just saw a group of some 400 warriors in the distance, dozens of Dagoth banners above them too. So he finally comes, Rassador muttered ominously. Lady Azura has been silent ever since I gave the young Mer his task. The wise woman spoke up. That the scouts can see further than a few dozen steps tells us all we need to know. Agreed, Abasel grinned. We must prepare to honor he who so honored us and gave us all eternal succor. Vassala held back a growl of annoyance. He did not like the rise of the Dagoth, but he was also no honorless cur that spat on the blessing his people were given. What is our plan, then? He asked. Plan? Gilor chuckled snidely. We do as we are told, of course. The bluntness of his words annoyed his fellow Ashkans something fierce, but what annoyed them even more was the fact they could find no true retort to his words. Their people were saved, and now it was time to do as they are bid. Eternal dishonor would go to any who went against it. Thus agreed without a word being uttered, all 5 greater leaders of the Ashlanders, who no longer dwelt in Ash, stood at the entrance of the old home and awaited patiently, even as their people gathered around them with curiosity in their eyes and excitement in their hearts. An hour passed, and then 2, and when time came upon the 3rd, finally the horizon shifted and black banners were seen fluttering in the distance. Vassalor, being the most keen-sighted of the lot, immediately recognized the supposed Darhashin tribe and scowled upon seeing them, drawing the attention of the rest. Rawia realized it next and chuckled. I always did find the entire secret tribe idea to be ridiculous, but my lady said they were to be left alone. Bah! Vassalor scoffed loudly, dishonorable, but not forbidden. And oh, how bitter he felt saying those words. Raven's point of view. I will be the first to admit that we took our sweet time moving southwest, my entourage being almost sluggish in their movements as they admired their restored homeland. Nerevar, who decided to tag along while keeping his helmet on for the most part and pretending to be one of my bodyguards, was just as stunned as the rest of them. He had seen these lands so many times it isn't even funny, and the change struck him much harder than anyone else. Not that I could blame any of them, as I already noticed tiny mushrooms beginning to sprout all over the place and very small numbers of insects ever so slowly populate the lands. It was like looking at dead land awakening, which admittedly was not that far from the truth. Which is why when we reached Aldrun some 2 days later than planned, I could only smile wryly at the group of Ashlander leaders standing at the head of the collective nomad population of the island. Well over 20,000 elves when all gathered, a relatively small number on a wider scale, but still one that would be relevant in the future. Greetings, kinsman. My voice carried well beyond the furthest point of the city. A blessedly lovely day we are having, is it not? I may or may not have put just a teeny bit of my Elnofe aura into the spell, causing a massive portion of them to lower their heads. It took me half a minute more to reach them fully, and the quintet waiting for me was staring at me with anything between irritation, greed, and outright reverence in the case of the Urshilaku and the Anamusa. Lord Dagoth. The wise woman approaches first. For the peace of mind of all, would you enlighten us as to what happened with Red Mountain and its baleful gaze? Theatrics it is then, that which once cursed us all by my hand now blesses the land. My response caused immediate excited shuffling in the massive crowd. Rejoice, my kinsman. I spread my arms wide. No longer will you hunger, and no longer will your very homes try and kill or starve you. The sole Ashkan I did not meet looked like he understood what I was doing, but did not try and stop me. Under the blessing and guidance of the good Daedra, I faced the 4 corners of the troubled house and came out unscathed. I did not stop moving forward as I spoke, and neither did I remove my aura. With might of the Sijic, I stood before the core of Red Mountain and stared upon our tormentor. And in the end, it was not I that flinched, but the mountain itself. So have I honored you, my kinsman. My voice lowers, yet it still carries just as far as I lower my hands and fold them behind me, and so shall you honor me. Their leaders all close their eyes in understanding, and I issue my first command, now kneel. The authority in my voice, born of both power and state of being, has all hold their breath. A silent moment passes before the first awed elf proclaims, Great Ashkan, soon joined by numerous other voices as one by one the elves knelt to their new overlord. One by one, the Ashkans accepted the ad hoc vote, and soon I had an entire culture bowing to me. Today was a good day. I found myself seated in the grand hall of Aldrun, accompanied solely by the still utterly silent Anandor and the 4 Ashkans and wise woman. Content to wait for them to gather themselves, I leaned back in my seat and enjoyed a delightfully flavorful dose of marijuana. I did just overturn their whole world, so I guess they couldn't really be blamed. Awfully bold what you did. The Erebenimson Ashkan is the first to speak up, taking our choice from us like that. Taking your choice away. I raise an eyebrow. Your people decided, did they not? He scoffs but doesn't retort. For whatever reason, the wise woman looked distinctly happy with this turn of events. What are your plans, my lord? Gilor of the Zainab asks. The shady oil merchant was already plotting how to best capitalize on this turn of events, and any information I gave him would inevitably be used to make his tribe prosper. Fair is fair. Rather straightforward, really. I straighten in my seat. I will be going to Old Ebonheart, where the great lords of Morrowind are currently staying, and I will do as I did here. Do not take this the wrong way, but I did not come to Vardenfell just to secure the loyalty of your tribes. They are your tribes now as well, my lord. The ancient Arnamusa smiles kindly, just as the great houses will be your house once you are Hortator. The Erebenimson's eyes widen, and he exhales a snort. You don't do things by half measures, do you? Never, I grin. A conclave was already held before I came here. Red Mountain tormented the whole of Morrowind, and not just Vardenfell. Once I saved our futures, I swore to lead our people into glory as well. I do not plan on breaking that promise. So what is it that you wish of us? The Urshilaku asks, with an eager grin. Shall we march out and join you in retaking the lands of our kinsmen? If you so choose. I smirk at the excited Ashkan. The armies are already prepared, and morale is no doubt soaring right now. It would be folly not to take back what once was ours. I pause and turn serious. However, before that, I have other commands for the tribes. All 5 of them turn just as serious and wait for me to speak. Your nomadic lifestyle has been useful until now. I raise a finger to forestall any protests, which is why I want you to resettle Aldrun and rebuild the city to honor our ancestors. The time has come for you all to set some roots and for your children to grow up in prosperity. Had anyone else uttered what I just did, they would have probably gotten stabbed to death by the usually inflexible Ashlanders in an instant. But I was both prophet and king, ordained and elected. They would follow, or their people would find someone else who would. Rassidor frowns, but we have traveled for thousands of years. And all roads lead to some destination, old one. I offer the confused old man a gentle smile. He lets out a long sigh before slowly nodding. Rawia speaks up. If they trust in your judgment, who are we to question? And so all other protests were snuffed out. We spoke for many hours and well into the night, and upon the following morning, an army of some 3,000 Ashlanders marched out with my own small force, all of them traveling south to what was once the city of Vivek. But I was not with them, for instead of further wasting time on walking, Savos, Anandor, Akulakan, Veyrin, and myself took to the skies atop Scorch and Brightburn, flying straight to Old Ebonheart, even as Scorch mocked his fellow Firebird with his Ascension the entire way there. What an absolute cunt. We landed in the middle of the fortified keep the House Lords were staying at, the site of proper civilization, making me wish to hug the paved ground. Not that I did, of course, no matter how much I wanted to. The guards who noticed us grew panicked for a moment and raised their weapons. only to immediately lower them after one look from yours truly and bow their heads. Without bothering to acknowledge them further, my posse and I marched into the large Dres keep, the gates opening on their own one after another before their protectors could so much as touch them. Already I was hearing a commotion spreading behind me, but that was for later me to deal with. The scene repeated a few times, each one making my steps just slightly more bold than they were moments ago, and soon I found myself stepping into a grand throne room housing all 5 great lords and Davos as my representative. They were joined by a trio of priests, a robed priestess of Azura, a heavily scarred Redaran bearing Boethian iconography on his armor, and an androgynous-looking masked elf bearing the distinct equipment of the Morag Tong. The Grandmaster themselves, if I am not wrong. A beat of silence passed as my eyes slowly met each and every one of the room's occupants, all of them looking at me with the same eyes as the Ashkans, but with far greater gravitas in their backbones. Veyrin's breath hitched as he understood what was about to happen, making me hold back a chuckle. The first to speak was the priestess of Azura. Hail, Lord Dagoth, blessed champion of Azura. The Redaran veteran was next. Hail, Lord Dagoth, walker of the path. Third was the Grandmaster, but all they did was ever so slightly incline their head. Holding back a chuckle at the cheeky Mephilan, I moved my gaze to Davos, who looked at me like I had just reaffirmed an old resolution of his, as if I had just proven him unequivocally right in his life choices and his decision to follow me all over again. Still, some things would never change, as he knelt and greeted me with a simple boss. The other 5 remained silent for a long while, exchanging glances between each other before coming to a silent agreement. With a look of genuine happiness and respect, Sadras Sindral spoke. House Sadras recognizes the deeds of Lord Dagoth, and knelt. Next came the Telvanni, and Baladas openly scoffed before he too knelt, his voice as dry as a desert, as he intoned, House Telvanni recognizes the might of Lord Dagoth. I didn't bother hiding an eye roll. He was probably just as annoyed by the pageantry as I was. House Indaril, a familiar voice intones, and I am forced to raise a surprised eyebrow as Alandro Indaril is the one speaking, recognizes the piety of Lord Dagoth. He kneels. Varan Sarano stares me right in the eyes as he speaks. House Redaran recognizes the honor of Lord Dagoth. He too kneels. And last, and potentially not least, Anaris Dress falls under the peer pressure, and she too speaks. House Dress recognizes the dominion of Lord Dagoth, and kneels. The short ritual thus complete, all of them stood up and intoned, Hail, Lord Dagoth Raven, Hortator of Morrowind. All according to plan. General POV. Within the white gold tower, a messenger nearly collided with a suddenly alert guard as he rushed to the inner council chambers of Emperor Titus Mede II of Tamriel, practically bursting into the room and interrupting what looked to be a rather tense and heated debate between all of the council members and the yet-secret crown princess. All eyes went to the messenger, every single one of them all too eager to leave the discussion about the next meeting of the Elder Council for later. What is it? Titus Mede asked, not at all annoyed by the sudden breather. A message from Morrowind, Your Majesty. The young man bowed his head further. A guardsman of House Dagoth just delivered it to the Penitus Oculatus. Bring it here, the Emperor commands, and immediately unfolds the letter, ignoring the grubby hands of his heiress with a practiced dexterity born of many, many meetings. Minthara crossed her arms with a huff. What does it say? Titus grinned widely and let out a merry bout of laughter a moment later, before once more folding the scroll and looking at his assembled council. It would seem that Morrowind has just elected their new Hortator. The group of councillors were dumbstruck for a moment before the true meaning of the words hit them, and all of them started patting each other on the back and grabbing drinks as the dream of a united Tamriel became so much more real. Minthara, on the other hand, was already halfway out of the chamber, her orb already glowing within her hand and an eager skip in her step. Truly, Titus thought, today was a very good day to be Emperor. Chapter 4, 144, Chapter 63, of Zeal and Strategy. I hold back a groan as I finally get a free moment to myself. Me being declared the sanctified dictator of an entire kingdom was of course a great achievement, the vast majority of people could only ever dream of, but dear gods, was the pageantry of it all draining on the soul. One measly hour after the househeads swore their loyalty, I had to get moving, barely having the time to settle in and have a quick meal first. First, I was led to a temple of the good Daedra, each where the resident priest blessed me in the name of their respective deity. The rituals would have probably had an effect if I was not already blessed by the Daedra themselves, but I knew it was all for show more than anything else. After all that was done, and a third of a day was wasted, we went to a temple to the Reclamations, which was basically just the three Daedra united, and had to go through another overlong ritual before the gathering masses. Thankfully for my patience, that was all the religious rites I had to go through for now, and soon I was standing atop a podium in the center of Old Ebonheart and giving a speech to the people present, most of whom were soldiers gathering for the war, promising glory and prosperity and reassuring them that the quietening of Red Mountain was just the start. The househeads reiterated their little submission ritual, and I reconfirmed their positions as my vassals and advisors. And then, of course, I had to stop a religious riot as people got just a bit too zealous and wanted to throw themselves at anything I commanded them right fucking now. Redirected that ticking time bomb into a citywide feast and celebration, and they thankfully took the hint and got drunk instead of starting to kill each other for perceived heresy. The rest of the day I spent dictating numerous letters to everyone of importance, both lesser and greater, as avoiding that would inevitably come to bite me in the ass later. Because of course a bunch of self-important little shits would be offended if I didn't consider them worthy of a missive. The one missive I sent to Alinor did make me grin though, as fitting in at least one veiled insult per sentence was a rather fun challenge. I could only imagine the fate of the poor fucker who would probably have to read it to their council. Still, all of that moving about and grandstanding took an entire day that I could have used on more productive things like planning a war and coming up with trade agreements, but needs must and all that. No reason to give my future detractors ammunition to talk shit. I did refuse the stupid fucking helmet they tried to get me to wear, however. A golden monstrosity with the visage of Nerevar carved into it and with his shitty mohawk added on top, just to make it even more jarring to look upon. They tried to make it the Hortator's official regalia, and I was having none of it, having to pull out a Hortator is not a position but a person statement out of my arse just to make them all shut up. Still, the whole thing wasn't a complete waste of my time, as it all allowed me to take the northern coast and centre of Vardenfell under my direct domain due to my lordship over Kogarun and Aldrun. The Ashlanders' declaration of my position as their great Ashkan, the unmourned swearing their loyalty solely to me, and the fact I was Hortator easily justified me expanding my personal domain for only the most basic restitution. None truly protested my land grab, as my word was effectively gospel at this point, and what with the territories in question being practically worthless, until very recently I actually came out of the entire day feeling like I had not wasted it utterly. Still made me feel drained though. My fatigue was thankfully almost entirely mental, and 1 minute after I sat down and finally took a breath, I felt the irritation slowly dissipate, soon replaced with the supernatural comfort my own new existence provided me with. I was unironically above getting a proper headache now. Inevitably, my thoughts drifted back to the sight of the crowd, a good half of whom looked near to frothing at the mouth with sheer fanaticism after what I did and said. Here is to hoping the idiots don't go full jihad in my name. I mutter with a sigh. Davos, Akulakan, Anondor, Savos, and my most gracious self were currently alone on one of the many balconies of the dress keep facing Red Mountain, Virene having been practically dragged off by the priests so he could recount everything that happened. He was definitely becoming the Grand Descendant if anything happened to Alandro. Of that much I was certain. Wouldn't know what that is, boss. Davos chuckles as he leans against a nearby wall, but you just need to direct them at something else, right? Even the cunt from Windhelm had his rabid dogs doing things to distract them. That is the plan, yes. I give him a quick nod. I'm just afraid some of the idiots will try and prove themselves worthy or something equally asinine and fuck things up out of proportion before I can ensure they do it productively. You should have considered that before you gave them a gift worthy of worship. Savos points out in a half-lecturing tone as he takes a seat opposite me. The people are riled up like never before. Calming them down will take a long while. He was still a bit out of it from receiving my blessing, but that did not mean he was suddenly reluctant to point out what he thought were mistakes or miscalculations. In fact, he seemed almost emboldened with his criticisms, which I found a somewhat refreshing change. I will have to examine the exact effects of it all soon. It was always going to happen. I scowl and grumble. People without hope for a future, suddenly being given it, will do a lot of stupid shit in their confusion. I let my head flop onto my hand. Guess I will just have to throw the dumbest ones at the Argonians. Savos winces slightly. A bit cold, wouldn't you say? I shrug, not even bothering to look back up. You've seen how stupid fanatics can get during Ulfric's little rebellion. If the worst of them can't curb their impulses, then they may as well be spent on something useful. Spent? My living grandfather repeats in a deadpan. Spent? I confirm and sit up. I am not getting emotionally invested into fools that will inevitably infuriate me, so yes, they will be spent. He stares at me for a long moment before chuckling. They really annoyed you, haven't they? You can't even begin to imagine. I snort and summon drinks for everyone. Now enough about that. We came here to take a break, not reiterate my frustrations. Indeed. He agrees easily, having gotten quite a bit of splash damage, with people pestering him near constantly. He leans back in his seat and hums, "So, when do you plan to inform your Lady Firend of everything that happened?" I blink, I didn't call her in a while, shit, and immediately rush to my room. The shit-eating grin Savos had on his face was something I would carve into memory. We'd see who will have the final laugh, you old fart. Thankfully, I managed to placate the dreaded dragon overlady well enough, and her pouting session quickly turned to excitement as she started asking me all about my most recent adventure. Her good mood was palpable, and soon I too found myself smiling as I regaled her of most the things I did. She did not even consider criticizing me over the risky ritual. As for us, that kind of thing was par for the course, and pretending we would never take risks with anything would be the height of hypocrisy. When I got to my current troubles, all she did was grin and began returning my previous teasing with interest, now that we were both effectively fated to be the sovereigns of our peoples. The future relations between Morrowind and the Empire were left unresolved, though, even if we both knew the path that needed to be taken for the best outcome. But neither of us felt like outright stating it right now, her because of her own shyness at the topic, and myself due to my poker patience. She did act rather suspicious when I told her about my plans of expanding Morrowind and retaking lands from the Argonians. But when I asked her what she was thinking about, she refused to elaborate, and even managed to resist my merciless teasing or similar attempts at prodding. I need to update my tactics, it would seem. We spoke long into the night, and when morning came I found myself marching into the Dres throne room with a relaxed pep in my step. All 5 of the great lords were present, and none stopped me as I made my way to the head of the table, and the high chair usually reserved for the head of the Dres. In fact, every one of them stood as I entered, bowing their heads as I passed them by. Quite the heady thing, I will admit. Thank you all for your patience, and for getting up so early, I say as they all take their seats once more. Are there any urgent matters to discuss before we begin planning our moves? None of the nobles spoke, but the Grandmaster of the Morag Tong, who had partially blended into one of the corners of the room, cleared their throat. There were a few fools who thought your Ascension a travesty and planned to take matters into their own hands. I hold back a groan. How fucking stupid can people get? And were they dealt with, I ask? The most violent ones were disposed of. The Grandmaster no doubt smirks under their mask. The rest were educated on the error of their ways. You beat them up, I deadpan. They shrug, and I think I hear a familiar muffled giggle at the edge of my senses. They were but peasants, my lord. Should have just natural selected the lot of them, scorched deadpans. Next time, just apprehend the ringleaders and have the guards deal with the rest, I order, without raising my tone. I can approve of your current resolution, as things were rather excited yesterday, but there should be a proper way of doing this. They bow and say nothing. Anything else? I ask, and sweep my gaze across the room. And getting no answer in turn, I clap my hands. Then we may begin. A bit of an awkward moment passes, as the high nobles were not truly used to anyone so utterly above them in authority, but Lady Sadras has none of that and speaks up. The first thing we should discuss is how to best deal with our most recent windfall. She turns to face me. The Argonians are going to attack if we do not. All of us know this. The rest of the lords nod along, but at the same time the land is now blessed, and not using this opportunity to expand our food production would leave us dangerously reliant on outside help. We could always capture the lizard fools and have them do the work, Demnavani scoffs, and immediately feels like he is suffocating as my eyes meet his. Call me a filthy noir indoctrinated by foreign beliefs, dear Archmagister, but I will not abide slavery in my domain. I stare at him for a good dozen seconds, letting the pressure really set in before adding, "Are we clear?" He grits his teeth and forcibly retakes control of himself. "Clear, Hortator." Aneris' dress visibly holds back a scowl, but one raised eyebrow from me has her shutting up before she could speak. The travesty that is owning another intelligent being aside, I say as my power retreats, it is my belief that only the professional troops under our houses will be enough for what I have planned. No militias should be raised, and the governors of each area should be commanded to grant land to all elves interested. Varan Serrano immediately narrows his eyes. Apologies if I may sound doubtful, my lord, but would that not leave us dangerously outnumbered in the face of the Argonian horde? Their number has reportedly surpassed 120,000 already. That we know of for certain. The plan was always to defeat them in detail. He nods along, as we had already discussed that particular overarching idea, using our most elite troops and concentrating our magi into one small maneuverable army will allow us to strike their positions down, one after another, crushing their morale and their supplies while preserving our own numbers. The sheer planning that would take, I hear Alandro mutter, is something we have a distinct advantage in. I face the new Grand Descendant. The Telvanni have at least a few dozen skilled seers in their ranks. Demnavani grunts out affirmatively, still a bit miffed at his recent treatment. And unlike their destitute shadow scales, we have a rather healthy Morag tongue to aid us. I turn to face the Grandmaster, or so I hope, I add leadingly. All they do is incline their head and say nothing. Nodding in satisfaction, I turn back to the high nobles. So you see, as daunting as the idea may be, we will have the advantage in both information and maneuverability with our elite forces, allowing our less experienced and trained warriors to take and hold the land we capture with the least possible amount of resistance. A rather ambitious plan, Serrano points out, but not an impossible one with the help of enough mages and automatons. They all still seem a bit doubtful at the idea, since it was rather different than most ways people tended to conduct war, but all I would need was one victory to convince them. That and I was their bloody Hortator, they could grumble, but they would obey. Exactly, I give him a cheery nod. Why waste our already low numbers if we can win through bold strategy? And what if the animals choose to counter that plan by simply throwing themselves at our lands? Aneris asks. The entire south of Morrowind would be overrun in months. Then we use their physical superiority against them, I point at her, my choice of words causing a few frowns of offended pride. If they choose to throw themselves at our prepared defenses, then we utterly destroy their supply lines, letting not a single grain of their rice reach the front lines. Serrano's eyes widen slightly as he immediately catches on, and with Morrowind still being bereft of much food, they would not be able to forage. He continues for me. Indeed, I smirk. An Argonian warrior needs almost twice as much food as a Dunmer one. My smirk twists into a toothy grin. They would starve within days. The preparations necessary for something like this, Sindril speaks up, we would need everything done perfectly to succeed. Not necessarily, I shake my head. While a constant risk of failure will be present, my automatons should be able to brute force their way through any logistical issues we may find ourselves facing. We will succeed no matter what. They share looks amongst themselves, and after a full minute of silence, they offer their nods. I raise a glass filled with a nice serving of Dagoth brandy, a drink I was growing increasingly appreciative of. With that initial discussion out of the way, my goal of initial target has not changed. I pause for dramatics. Mournhold will be ours once more. They all raise their glasses in turn, and just like that it is decided. And now to ruin their mood with land reforms. Chapter 4, 145, Chapter 64, The Staging. General POV. 2 days after the first meeting of the newly elected Hortator's Council, a quartet of figures found themselves walking through the heavily guarded gates of Old Ebenhart, all of them drawing salutes and nods from the guards as they passed. This place feels like a death trap, Almirall Farron mutters, his eyes rapidly scanning the near overcrowded walls. The elf closest to him, clad in colours of House Dagoth, unlike Farron's Redoran heraldry, shrugs. They got their loins in a twist about Boss getting assassinated or something. He shakes his head. Personally, I'd feel sorry for the assassins. One would think you would be thankful to do less work, Lord Davos. The armoured Dunmer wearing the same colours as himself chuckles. Might as well use this time to rest. Gods know we will not be getting the opportunity again anytime soon. Oh, shove it, Varren. Davos rolls his eyes. You just want to slack off. What can I say? The captain of the Sworn Mer shrugs. I do not find standing around and doing fuck all that interesting. The sole human amongst them grunts, much prefer not being in one place either. You are a scout, Furious, Davos deadpans. The man simply nods, causing the poor Mer to roll his eyes. It is a solemn duty, Almirall Farron states seriously. Not all our work is supposed to be enjoyable. Furious simply ingores him, while Varren raises his hands placatingly, and I am not saying I refuse to do it, just that I will take the opportunity when presented. The Redoran shakes his head and says nothing. Great, Davos scoffs playfully, now you made him pout. Almirall twitches but doesn't otherwise react. Deciding to shift the topic, Davos asks, Anyway, you and Oren had your bet again. We did. Varren grins. My boy's got one over his, so now he has to organize camp and they get latrine duty. Davos exhales amusedly. Honestly, I get that it gets boring, but... Hear ye, hear ye. A voice interrupts their conversation as they pass by the town square, all of them turning to see a small crowd surrounding a town crier. Our glorious Hortator has announced his first decree. Oh, this will be fun, Davos mutters. The crier goes on. Under the wisdom of the good Daedra, our blessed leader has ordered that all Mer willing and not currently taken by other duties are hereby granted the right to claim arable land in their own name. No taxes shall be levied on them for 10 years, and interest-free loans are to be provided so that you may all make an honest living. He clears his throat. Make note that you may not claim more land than you can reasonably exploit, and that you will be obligated to sell half your produce at reasonable price. A beat passes and murmurs begin to spread throughout the crowd. But being a paid professional, the crier simply goes on to repeat, Hear ye, hear ye. Bold. Furious is the first to break the silence amongst the 4 officers. Too bold. Davos chuckles at this. That does sound like him. The Imperial gives the elf a long look. You do realize no reasonable noble will tolerate this loss in power. Dagoth is going to be swimming in assassins in a blink. Surprisingly, it is Almirall who reacts with a chuckle. This is not Cyrodiil, my friend. Furious eyebrows raise. What do you mean? A Hortator's authority is absolute. The Redoran answers simply, the title is meant to be given in times of great strife and need, and as thankful as I am for the deeds of Lord Dagoth, simply blessing the land is not enough to bring our people away from their lethargy. Frowning, Furious turns to Davos with a questioning look. He is right. The Dunmer shrugs. Boss is now everyone's boss, and if they say anything, they will end up like that Indaril cunt. He frowns. What was his name again? All 3 of his companions collectively shrug. Snorting, Davos shakes his head. So yeah, don't worry about it. He can deal with some uppity idiots. Thus satisfied, the quartet continued on their walk, passing by numerous groups of elves, either carrying around supplies, enjoying a break between drills, or simply attempting to continue with their normal lives despite all the ruckus. It was not by mere coincidence that they soon approached an empty strip of land within the city, a place once holding a decrepit warehouse, now deconstructed, and the land reassigned to be used by nearly 100 artisans and half as many engineers currently working wood and metal to make compact and maneuverable field artillery. Furious was the first to notice their uniqueness, being that the Legion always had siege equipment close at hand. Those Scorpios are smaller than they should be. Almeril nodded along but soon frowned. They are using metal limbs and cranks. Pretty compact as well. Varen nodded along. Deciding he had let them speculate long enough, Davos interjects, Boss wanted to really hammer home his whole rapid victory plan, so he ordered hundreds of the little things. Supposedly, they should scythe through Argonian field fortifications and formations with ease. Furious grunted a vaguely approving noise and nodded, and it was then that two figures detached from a group of artisans and engineers and approached them. One was a noble of Dres and the other of Sadras. Merrin Regnild. Almeril greeted them with a nod. Good to see you both. Merrin Zadir gave a lazy salute, while Regnild Sadras smirked slightly. Not surprised to see the lot of you here? He looks at Davos. Got any new instructions for us, Dagoth? Momentarily, Davos was tempted to fuck with the elf, but chose to let him off for now. No, we were just passing by on a break. You two heard about the decree yet? Yes. Merrin answers, and while I understand why it was done, I do not envy the poor fools that will have to deal with the chaos of it all. Speak for yourself, Sadras scoffs. Doing it any other way would have been too slow, and we'd get stuck with foreign import deals for the next 5 decades. People will be motivated to produce food and have more children to claim more land, which will be great for business no matter what. And I agree with that, I merely point out the issues. Merrin scowls. Hold on, what do you mean claim more land by having children? Regnlid grins back at him. Did you hear anything about a deadline? No, but why would we expect the offer to last forever? Merrin stops himself and frowns. Exactly. Sadras chuckles. He needs the entire kingdom populated, so why would he stop halfway? He turns to Davos with a questioning look. But Davos was no true politician, so all he could do was shrug. Wouldn't be too odd for him to do that. He may change conditions, but there is no reason for the land to go to waste. See? Regnild's smirk widened. Yeah. Merrin scowls and waves him off. Sadras chuckles before turning serious. Enough about that, you four here to see the ships? The ships, Davos blinks. You didn't know? Regnlid blinks. Guess you must have missed it. Ashlanders are supposed to arrive today and my lot have been commissioned to transport them. Ah, that. Davos's eyes widen slightly. Thought they were supposed to come a day later. Sadras smirks. My kin work quickly. Lead the way then, O mighty fleetmaster, Davos drawls, and they make their way to the docks. Exactly in time to see a group of warriors clad in Dagoth colors disembarking from the first ship. Seeing his friend still and his eye begin to twitch, Almeril gave Davos a concerned look. Are you well? Holding back a groan, Davos exhaled instead. He did not tell me about the 6th House remnants. That tracks, Regnild deadpanned. It really does, Davos laments internally. Raven's point of view. 5 days have passed since the first council meeting, and the army shuffle was mostly completed by now. Not that my first meeting with my new subjects was the last one, far from it in fact, as we met on a daily basis, sometimes even holding multiple sessions when a particularly difficult question needed resolving. Put bluntly, Morrowind was in a shit state, blessing or not, and I needed to get the entire nation working post-haste if we wanted to be as relevant as possible when the time came. Already people were bitching at me for my land reform, but I wasn't about to let a few noblemen gobble up the suddenly clear soil enriched by centuries of volcanic minerals sinking into it. The land went from barren to one of the most fertile areas in the world in the blink of an eye, and I wasn't about to let it turn into a plantation when it could so easily provide a good living standard for the vast majority of my people. Still found it a bit odd to consider them truly my people, but I supposed it would inevitably click as all things did, and I would forget these thoughts ever existed. I was not completely unreasonable, though, as those elves that could prove their previous ownership over certain territories would be compensated. But that was as far as I would go. The great houses would still retain most of their territories. It is just that their subjects would have more rights now by the virtue of owning the land they worked. I wasn't about to allow a serf-based feudal system to appear. That shit belonged in High Rock, and if I had my way, it would not exist for too long there either. Obviously, such ambitious agricultural expansion plans needed resources, and soon our main topic, besides war preparations of course, became trade agreements. We needed to import enough seed, tools, and building materials to support my plans, and in massive amounts at that. And that is without securing transport and fair distribution. Which is where my personal wealth and contacts came in, as I contacted all 3 of Skyrim's northern ports, and the Blackbriars in Riften, drawing out every favor reasonable to get those resources shipping yesterday. We were able to fulfill most of our demands by directly contacting Torrig and having him pull a few strings of his own in return for a defensive alliance, as if either of us would fail to help the other otherwise. And the forges of Solitude's industrial district were already burning hard enough to choke out the skies. It helped that my vault was overflowing, and I let a bit of that spill over, covering a third of the cost on my own while using the newly organized collective treasury of Morrowind to cover the rest. You should not rely so eagerly on greed to command your subjects. The disembodied voice of Dagoth draws me from my thoughts. Faith binds Mer much more firmly. He rarely ever spoke, even if I knew he could do it much more often. I think he was still processing the fact I became Hortator just like that. Rolling my eyes, I couldn't help but scoff. I do not plan on being an absolute ruler permanently. And I do not bind them with greed, I bind them with prosperity. There is a distinct difference there. They will betray you, it is inevitable, he points out. Not until I betray them. I chuckle. The duty of a ruler is to their people and their stability and prosperity. Once that duty becomes an excuse and the people a means, they have every right to rebel. He retorts immediately, a foolish notion. Subjects are meant to obey their betters, abandon this noir foolishness before it is too late. It is cute you think I got this from them? I scoff. He remains silent as I step out onto a nearby balcony and into the view of a large internal training ground. The sight of 2 Dunmer fighting each other with just a bit too much energy greeting me like it did for 3 days past. At least your servants are capable. Dagoth yaps on, even if you should ensure their loyalty properly. Oh, do shove your archaic mindset where it belongs. I roll my eyes as I see Davos hand Ulvis's ass to him for the 10th time in these past few days. I have neither your weakness of character nor your lack of confidence. Humph. I hold back a wince of pity as Davos grabs Ulvis's shield and throws him on the ground behind him with only one hand, the armored form of Nerevar separating them with an amused chuckle and helping the younger elf get up. The little rivalry that sprouted the moment they met amused me something fierce. The 2 disliked the perceived advantages of the other, and while Davos was more than able to ignore that baser impulse, he was not above slapping Ulthis about when he asked for it. So long as it didn't turn to anything idiotic, I felt no need to interfere. Seeing the 2 Ashkans who also accompanied their warriors entering the ring, I begin humming a song whose name I've long since forgotten, and leave the Urshilaku and Erebenimson to their fight. I had more letters to write after all. The 6th day of my stay at Old Ebonheart had me standing at that self-same training ground myself, after a rather boring council session was further derailed by the rather archaic mindsets of the 2 Ashkans. I could have certainly told them to shut the fuck up, but that would have been counterproductive, even if they were well aware they were there mostly as a formality. Anyway, the Telvanni contingent finally arrived yesterday, and with them came Divaith Fear, who took one good look at me and declared me to be the most ridiculous elf he had ever laid his eyes upon. He then proceeded to goad a few of the other magisters who came with him, mocking their accomplishments quite thoroughly while comparing them to me. A good number of them, being the usual arrogant Telvanni, voiced their doubts of my capabilities, and even as the wiser of their number quickly retreated from that conversation, more of the fools joined in. All of them were challenged by yours truly to a quick little magic duel. At once, they arranged themselves against me, and I did not even bother summoning anything but the clothes I already wore as I smirked at the lot of them. "Are you quite sure you want this?" I ask, seeing Fear looking at them like they are idiots from the corner of the room while he shared some whispers with Nerevar. He, of course, took one short look at the armor and immediately knew the elf's identity. Not that he bothered revealing it. A fact I found very good for his long-term health. The Telvanni Magister, whose name I refused to bother remembering, went to say something, but I was not about to listen to more of his yapping, and in an instant, all 12 Master Magi were in my telekinetic grasp, flailing about helplessly as I simply carved numerous disabling wards under them and powered them without bothering to move. I waited 10 full minutes before offering surrender. By their own laws, I could have simply snapped their necks and not gotten a single complaint, and all of them knew it, which meant that I now had a dozen mages in my debt. How very generous of them all. Now, if only I could go for a walk outside without a disguise and not cause a riot to break out, my day would be made. A Mer could hope. In what felt like the blink of an eye, 10 days had passed since my arrival to Old Ebonheart, and so did the initial scouting period as multiple reports arrived from the Tong about enemy positions and potential movements. The army was drilled and properly reshuffled, all of them prepared for rapid and constant movement, and supplied to the point of ridiculousness, with an entire 2 cohorts worth of automatons being assigned simply to hauling. The people gathered to see us off as we marched out of the old city, and many of them offered food or sealed drinks to the soldiers as they passed. Priests called for the favor of the good Daedra, and their fellow warriors came to salute them. Most of the army would only follow after us after all, their task to garrison all we conquered and ensure we had a means to resupply and rest. Silently, I raised a hand, and the crowd turned completely silent. My simple order of march, washing over them like a wave as the troops began leaving the city in good order. And so it was that on the 22nd of Evening Star of the year 200 of the 4th era, the army of Morrowind, untied for the first time in millennia, marched on Mournhold. Chapter 4, 146. Chapter 65. On the March to Mournhold. The war tent grows silent as the scout, a Morag Tong agent, quite plainly, finishes recounting the second wave of reports she had just been directed with, the tension around me growing with each word that left her mouth. Well, Davos breaks the silence dryly. That is unfortunate. The masked Tong agent feels like she wants to shrink into herself, but remains silent. Understandably, being the bearer of bad news to a room filled with high nobility is never fun. Unfortunate, yet completely expected. Feeling the slightest buzz of irritation in the back of my head, I pinch the bridge of my nose and count to 3 before slowly exhaling. They plan on throwing children at us now? The group I internally called my command staff all turned to me with questioning looks. Of the great lords, only Alandro Indaril and Baladas Demnavani were present, with Varan Serrano leading the offensive reserve and Anaris Dres being left in command of the rear defenses and future garrisons. Sindril Sadras was understandably left behind, as she was quite incapable of combat at her age, which left her in charge of the logistics of our campaign, where she could use the greatest of her talents. They all had their representatives joining us, though, and all were familiar faces. From my corner came Davos, Ulthis, Varen, and Oren, the 2 Ashkans, and if we were being technical, Legate Furious. Almaril Farron led the Redoran contingent, Merin Zeder was in charge of the disproportionately small dress detachment, and Regnild Sadras was in charge of the artillery. All of them had their respective subordinates nearby, but they did not truly have a voice at the table. Demnavani did bring Divaith Fear and Vels Carvani with him, mostly to make his fellow Magi shut the hell up about their perceived lack of representation on the table, even if the house abhorred the very idea of a chain of command. A decent gathering of people all told, and quite telling of the growing influence of those fortunate enough to meet me early on, as they now soared through their respective houses' ranks. Whether this was to see them ensure my cooperation or to see them fail was yet to be seen. What? I scoff. Did you expect they could gather that many troops by just mustering proper warriors? Honestly, my bets were on the Hist getting spooked by Red Mountain, suddenly stopping its tantrum, and panic reacting by throwing their support behind the Anzilil more completely. Still, Baladas Demnavani interjects, 250,000 lizards is over double what we originally predicted. Quite, Devaith Fire agrees from his corner of the tent, lounging as one of his clones fed him grapes as if he was not currently in a war meeting, and that is not counting the garrisons and local militias. He adds as he finishes chewing, most of which we agreed would be far weaker than in Black Marsh proper. Almeril Farron counters. Fear simply raises an eyebrow. Just because an enemy is not as entrenched as they could be, doesn't mean they are irrelevant. The Redoran nods but still adds, Argonians are terrible at defending outside of their marshes, so you will forgive me if I discount them as true threats. The Telvanni scoffs and shakes his head. Simply throwing more meat at us will not save them. I speak up again. Just because they managed to scramble up some additional troops does not mean they are suddenly capable of reacting to our thrust with any kind of increase to their efficiency. Besides, I add a bit ominously, we already knew they would keep throwing bodies at us the longer we took to win, and we will not make them surrender without some truly catastrophic losses. No one even bothered to consider the mere possibility of invading Black Marsh proper. That was a hell I would not subject my subjects to without at least a few years of preparation. My words are met with grim agreement, and instead of letting the lot of them whine further, I turn to Alandro Indaril. You were about to report the destruction of the enemy forward camp, were you not? The first trace of the enemy, and I nearly had to stop a fistfight when a bunch of fools started arguing about who would lead or participate in the vanguard. Jokes on them, I didn't care one whit about their glory and simply sent the most appropriate troops to do the job. Yes, Hortator, the descendant of Almalexia, salutes. The camp appears to have only been a forward observation base, and while all we found were orders to immediately report any sightings of our advance, none managed to escape us in time to follow them. Good, the less time they have to react, the better. The spearhead I decided on was mostly made up of Furious's cohort, Indaril's heavy warriors, and a mix of my unmourned and white cloaks, the combination of heavy armor and light cavalry leading to a distinct lack of casualties and a rapid culling of the outnumbered light troops of the enemy. Prisoners? I questioned after a moment. He does not even pretend to be sorry, as he blatantly lies, they all fought to the death. How very brave of them, I deadpan. The lack of mercy was something I was more than prepared for, and while I could have begun asserting discipline in the ranks, I knew my people were out for blood, and I would have to punish hundreds of them for insubordination before everything was said and done. I would only act when the decisive moment came and we faced a greater number of the Argonian army. I could only mentally apologize to the scouts and smaller forces because I doubted any of them would be surviving for long. Out of sight and out of mind was the name of the game for now. I could pontificate on morality when my kingdom was not in a state of war and near poverty. With that resolution, I took a short breath and resumed the meeting. The late night found me strolling around camp on my lonesome. Today's meeting was productive despite the frankly expected news, and I was taking a moment to relax on my lonesome. Well, mostly on my lonesome, I still had an invisible automaton and a dumb bird keeping me company. Oi! As I heard absolutely nothing worth hearing, my eyes began trailing the war camp. The presence of hundreds of Telvanni was an immense boon indeed. For each night, they would raise a fortification of transmuted stone, while I enchanted a concealing mist into existence. The arrogant little shits kept grumbling about doing grunt work, but they never even considered lessening the quality of it all. Prideful as they were also hard workers when properly intimidated. Not that it mattered, 300 annoyed mages were more than worth a secure rest for my force of 12,000. A bit arrogant of me to bring only 12,000 soldiers and some 3,000 automatons as a first wave, I know. But even with these numbers, we had to march divided across multiple roads, so as to reach our destination within any kind of reasonable time frame. Could I have magicked a ridiculous way for us to travel quicker? Probably. Would that be incredibly stupid in the long run and make them rely on me for everything as well? Most definitely. Thankfully, I very well could magic away the usual problems that came with a long foot march, and the camp was kept to exacting order, with latrines being dug in a timely and well-ordered manner, and healing being provided to any who found themselves suffering from the constant exertion. My Fulmer healers were already building a great reputation amongst the troops, with blisters and torn muscles being a thing of the past. They proved themselves so useful and efficient that even the Telvanni were forced to grudgingly accept them as peers. Lesser peers, of course, as they put others above them, but peers still. Unconsciously, my stroll led me to one of the plain square towers guarding the temporary stone gate of the fort, startling the drowsiness out of the poor guards stationed there. Preempting any greetings or surprised sputterings, I rose a hand to silence them and merely stepped up to the crenellated edge, focusing my eyes into the distance. It was difficult, but soon, with just my pure eyesight, I could ever so slightly see the distant silhouette of a great walled city. My magical sight only served to confirm it all, as Mournhold was well within our grasp. We would reach it by tomorrow evening, just in time to strike with the greatest advantage. For according to reports, a good portion of the Argonian army was currently stationed to the west of the city, camping out just before its main entrance, for a reason I would have to discover later, and practically asking for a rapid assault with their lack of fortifications. They would outnumber us at least 2 to 1, but that was to be expected. What they would most certainly not be doing, however, was outgunning us. My force may have been deliberately made small, but it was also composed of the best Morrowind had to offer, each great house and Ashlander tribe being represented by their greatest warrior or magi. The mixing of the different units was problematic at first, but a few days of grueling marching had that fixed as camaraderie in the face of unreasonable orders was a thing built most rapidly. Still, I was more than happy with the army I managed to collect in such a short time. The core was made up of Redaran veterans and my own sworn mer, their flanks guarded by the most seasoned of the Drees border wardens, and further bolstered by the Ashlanders deemed worthy of joining us. The latter were terrible at formation fighting, but they made for great skirmishers. Supporting them were the Sadras, who, following my choice of giving the artillery to their command, both sent and hired the best marksmen they could get their hands on, bolstering the number of my own crossbows considerably and ensuring the safety of the Telvanni detachment. Speaking of the mushroom dwellers, 300 Dunmer Magi, a full 20 of whom could quite easily be called High Masters, all led by 2 archmages of considerable power. They were by far the least in number present, but by Dagoth's saggy loincloth they would burn some lizards when the time came. Part of me honestly pitied the Drees in all of this. Their elites were more tokens than anything else, and while I could appreciate they would be doing over half the garrisoning, when the time came I knew they would be mocked for this later. Oh well, should have trained up better troops instead of losing them in constant border skirmishes, am I right? With me barely even noticing it, my silent stroll soon had me approaching my own tent for the night, and just as I was about to call it a day and get some light reading done, I heard a pair of voices close by. "Come now, my good man, there is no need to be so defensive about it. I assure you, keeping it all bottled up is just asking for trouble later." Nerevar? And to my surprise, it is Anandor's cold voice that answers him, "And I assure you that my state is none of your concern. Now say what you truly want from me and leave me to my vigil." "That tent will not escape you, friend," Nerevar points out with a bit of amusement. "Besides, I want nothing but to offer a bit of aid. Consider me sympathetic to your plight." He pauses. "We did experience similar events, did we not?" Anandor remains silent for a long while, no doubt attempting to endure a stare from Mr. Potion himself before exhaling with a slight harshness, "I doubt your reincarnations were as sudden and violent as my own experience." By this point I had grown curious enough to start spy observing their conversation with my third eye. Just call it a revival, there is no need to dance around it. Nerevar ignores the snow elf's discomfort with practiced ease, the ancient elf having gotten rid of his helmet for the time being. The first step to getting over it is accepting it happened. And how am to accept it? Anandor doesn't quite growl, even if his eyes practically scream out his frustration and confusion. Really should have dealt with that earlier, huh? But Nerevar literally has the patience of lifetimes and simply asks, "Was it not by your will that you remained?" The paladin blinks. "What? While I am mostly a warrior." My predecessor grins. "I am something of a powerful mage myself." I hold back a snort, "And I could feel your soul grasping at Mundus. If it lacked either will or weight, you would have been dragged into the afterlife, no matter what." "My duty was not yet complete," is all the paladin says. Nerevar turns oddly serious. "Whatever your reason, you risked damning yourself by staying around your body for too long. You are lucky Dagoth got there in time and somehow managed to come up with a revival spell on the spot. A soul unwilling to pass on, forcing itself back into its original vessel." Anandor mutters with a growing frown. "A perfect recipe for a revenant of some sort." "Exactly." The first Hortator nods, "And while everything turned out all right in the end, you still put your very being under heavy strain." He leans in slightly. "Say, have you been sleeping well recently?" The snow elf stills but doesn't answer. "Your lack of answer tells me enough," Nerevar scoffs, and immediately adds, "You need a break." "I will not abandon duty for comfort," Anandor retorts flatly. "And will you abandon duty for pride?" Nerevar, of course, has none of it. Take it from someone who has gone through much worse, far, far too many times. Your soul needs rest. Take a moment to relax. Revel in the simple act of existence. It will help you heal. Anandor looks like he considers it for a moment, but he quickly shakes his head. "Apologies, but I have oaths to honor. I will rest when a chance presents itself." "I wonder, would your lord agree with that choice?" Nerevar asks aloud. Anandor goes to respond. "He would agree with his predecessor." I interrupt as I walk up to them, causing the Falmer's eyes to widen and the Dunmer's smirk to grow more smug. Ignoring the moon and star, I face Anandor, meeting his eyes with irritation on my face. "You did not inform me of the complications. Why?" I dot. He pauses, obviously unwilling to talk, but seeing me not budge an inch, he sighs and speaks. "I did not wish to trouble you. You have much on your shoulders now, and that you even bothered with healing me after I fell against the enemy is consideration enough." My loud facepalm echoes throughout the camp, no doubt startling the shit out of some people. God's fucking damn it, Anandor. That was untested magic. He flinches. "It was my first attempt at a revivify spell, basically just shoving a soul back into a body and forcing it back to life with copious amount of restoration and soul manipulation. I am honestly surprised it even worked." Inevitably, a scowl forms on my face. "I admit a lot of the fault lies with me for not pressing you earlier, but think for a moment, man. It was a spell that I used for the first time and not a bloody act of the gods." He winces and looks away. "You should probably send him away," Nerevar pipes in. I could see he did not mean it maliciously, but the flinch of my Falmer subject was quite telling. Before Anandor can protest, I shake my head. Won't work, he is a monk, and just ordering him to go wild for a while is not feasible. Sighing, I give Anandor a both pleading and commanding look. "When the war ends, you will take a few months off to recuperate. Are we understood?" He looks like he wants to protest, but in the end, he simply bows his head. "Yes, my lord." "Excellent." I grin and snap my fingers, summoning a trio of chairs and a small crate of drinks. "Why don't we all take a moment to relax then? It may not be a perfect alternative, but a good drink ought to help a bit. And give me enough time to scan the shit out of the revived paladin." Anandor hesitantly puts his shield down, while Nerevar just hops onto his own seat, an odd nostalgia in his eyes. "Haven't been to Mournhold in centuries." He frowns momentarily before suddenly shifting into a grin. "I wonder if the Argonians fucked it up more than Almalexia did." Chapter 4, 147, Chapter 66, Lightning Strike, Part 1. The humidity in the air split around me as I patiently tapped my foot on the forest floor. It was odd how certain biological tendencies remained even when I theoretically should not have them. I could feel the pre-battle jitters spreading across my mostly silent troops, so seeing me relaxed should give them a small boost in confidence. Or at least that is the excuse I gave myself for my lack of discipline. Another soldier cleared his throat, and I was reminded as to why they were mostly silent. The humidity in the air was starting to feel downright unhealthy for a Dunmer to live in, and I was not one bit surprised that the hiss did its best to invasively spread its influence all the way to Mournhold. It was almost parasitic in a sense, as the plants visibly started taking on a shape more aligned to the tree god creatures, and the very land felt unwelcoming to us. Something I would deal with in due time, but also something that would affect the troops now. A presence closed in, and my eyes met those of Davos. "Is it time?" I asked. "Looks like it." He nods and walks up to me, a few of his fellow guildsmen moving behind the ranks instead of following him. He removes his helmet before handing me a written report and adds, "Guards should be changing soon enough." "And how is the evening affecting them?" I ask as I rapidly consume the information written. Davos makes a so-so gesture. "They are starting to look drowsy, but that is it." "Still an advantage," I note simply. Attacking is best done either at dawn or in the dusk, when the enemy was not yet woken up, or when their bodies began asking for rest. That the Dunmer took it as me seeking Azura's blessing was just a bonus. Shaking my head at the complete coincidence, I focus back on my right hand, Myr, and what of your other task? His eyes practically shine with vindictive glee as he grins. It was an interesting challenge. Excellent, I mirror his expression and slowly turn around, coming face to face with 50 of the least combative Telvanni attached to my army. "Are you prepared?" Their leader, being one particularly grouchy old fart, scoffs, "What do you take me for?" The way he simply ignored his helpers would have usually made them furious, but they learned to ignore his constant jabs, even if it did take them a few days. "Someone millennia out of practice fire," I snark. He rolls his eyes. "Yes, yes, would you like us to begin now?" "Go right ahead," I smirk, and try not to fall asleep before the wounded start coming in. This time he does not bother responding and simply turns to the large ritual circle between him and his lesser peers, raising his hand and calling on his magicka as the rest followed suit. Moments later, a mist started flowing upwards before slowly falling towards the enemy camp. I almost felt sorry for the Argonians as I summoned my blade and crown and took the first true step of this war. General P05. War Chief Sayakar stormed out of the shaman's tent with a by now familiar fury in his eyes, his egg brothers instinctually stepping out of his way as he marched back to his own lodging. Now they decide to give their support. He fumed internally, remembering his earlier conversation as he forcefully took deep, long breaths and slowed his stomps into a more reasonable walk. It did not matter in the end, for he was getting exactly what he and his blood-sworn fellows wanted, even if it came a few months later than they desired. He knew his troops would rejoice as well, all 50,000 of them, when he told them they would be the tip of the spear aimed at the hearts of the Greysskins. His slowly improving mood was ruined almost immediately, though as he took a few sniffs of the air and stilled, before growling in irritation, "Damn mist, just what we needed now." Thoroughly annoyed, he finally stepped into his tent and went to relax with a bit of sap, only to still utterly as he saw a distinctly Dunmary-style knife stabbed into the wooden pillar of his temporary home. With a newfound chill in his blood, Sayakar ripped free the tiny letter held up by the knife and began reading it, his eyes narrowing and his mouth twisting into a snarl as he did. "Dear Anselil and Company, it would seem my little warning at Kraganmore was not enough to get through to your thick little heads. So it appears I will have to enlighten your beastly selves of your mistakes the good old-fashioned way. Let it be known that from the moment this note reaches its destination, the Kingdom of Morrowind hereby enters a state of war with the nominal Kingdom of Argonia, one that shall not end until all rightful Morrowind land is returned under its aegis. You have fucked around, and now, foolish beast, you shall find out. Signed by Dagoth Raven, Lord of the Sixth House, Slayer of Alduin, Chosen of the Good Daedra, and Hortator of Morrowind." Sayakar barely had the time to finish reading and for curses to start forming on his lips before the mist passed him by and the smell of blood struck him like a hammer. Raven's point of view, mere moments prior. The mist roiled before us, the ritual guiding it to move exactly as to hide our approach without affecting our own eyesight. My troops kept eerily quiet as we approached the enemy camp, the noise being the stomping of boots and the release of crossbow bolts whenever an enemy forward scout felt adequately paranoid and came to ensure the mist hid nothing but wet air. Too bad it hid their worst nightmares instead. Already, Regnild's artillery was being set up behind us, and my other sub-commanders were also reaching their attack positions with appreciable synchronicity. Faran had our right flank, Fear and Zadir had our rear, Indaril had our left, and I had the center. All the while, Demnavani, Savos, the Ashlanders, and a majority of the automatons moved to block off any reinforcements from Mournhold itself. Soon enough, the wall of mist stopped moving, and so did we. Still silent, I rose my sword and my troops tensed. And then the mist dispersed, moving from the enemy camp to cover Mournhold in its entirety. There was a quiet moment as the Argonian lookouts were startled by the sudden shift, and being a generous Mer, I even gave them one more for realization to start entering their eyes. And then I charged. The first lizardman tried bringing his spear up, but I was already a blur, appearing right next to him, mid-swing with a mix of physical speed and space magic. His head flew into the air, and his comrades soon followed him as I allowed the lack of resistance to carry my blow. My free hand flew up, and the scrambling fools behind them were turned to dust in one burst of chain lightning, soon followed by a trio of firestorm-sized firewalls that began snaking throughout the enemy camp, immediately closing off most of their flanking routes as I and my sworn Mer marched over their charred corpses. Some fools still tried jumping us through their tents, or straight up jumping over them for the most idiotic ones, but they were soon met with bolt and halberd and were put down like the terminal retards they were. More of them began throwing themselves at us, even as I heard fireballs detonate all across the front, and the rest of the army begin clashing with our confused foe. I could feel the front getting pushed back near instantly, my own army using their advantage in both experience and surprise to take as much ground as possible as quickly as possible. And they were doing an incredible job of it. Panic was spreading through the camp, and a number of the Argonians were already starting to hesitate in their advance. Some of the more cowardly ones actually fleeing due to the sudden scramble. A light tingle in the air drew my sight back, and I focused back on the fight. Finally, they brought up a group of shamans to counter my magic, all of them collectively raising a protective ward that stopped my firestorm from simply cooking the next 200 fools that tried rushing me. Or so they thought. More and more of the Argonians rushed my positions and were cut down by my soldiers, or the deathly trio of Nerevar, Akulakan, and Anondor. The lizardmen seemingly emboldened, as I pretended to focus on blocking off their other attack routes. Once their number climbed up to 500, despite the casualties they were taking, I swung down with surge and the ward popped like a balloon. The enemy assault stopped as the Argonians' instincts screamed at them, and they looked up at my levitating form with pure terror in their eyes. Without a word of my usual mockery, I simply snapped my fingers, and they were all instantly incinerated. Varan, who was in charge of my detachment, promptly stopped his subordinates from gawking, and soon we were advancing further into the enemy camp. But it was simply too massive. There were tens of thousands of the little bastards encamped here, and while we were cutting them down by the hundreds every minute, their panic was already starting to soften. Even as their fortifications were scythed through by scorpion bolts or swarmed by spider automata, all the enemy needed to do was throw enough men at us to buy some breathing room, and our sudden assault would turn into a proper battle. Something we could certainly win, if we wanted to take greater casualties, that is. Silently, I plopped myself back on the ground, drawing the attention of my 3 companions. "They are regrouping too quickly," I informed them. "We need to disrupt them." Akulakan and Anondor remain silent, but Nerevar huffs, "So rush the enemy commander and destroy their center." He leans Sunder on his shoulder pad. Almost feels like the good old days. I grin below my crown. "Oh, you certainly will be." He raises an eyebrow, and I tell him of my cunning plan. General POV. "What do you mean you cannot stop it?" Sayakar hissed at the shaman. The older egg sister narrowed her eyes. "I told you whatever is going on, there is too powerful to contain." She pointed at the wall of smoke almost frantically. "We are simply not powerful enough to go against that without massive casualties." The war chief contains another furious growl and focuses back on the rapidly moving front line. the burning center of it all specifically, it seems you will have to make an attempt no matter what. His left and right flanks were holding well enough. Bolstered by a constant stream of reinforcements, they would buy time for the rest of them to reorganize and strike back at the Greyskins with their lives. An unfortunate strategy, but such was their situation. It was the center that truly worried him, however, as over 3,000 Egg Brothers had already rushed into that storm of flame without a single one coming back out. The mere sight of the rapidly moving wall of destruction serving to demoralize his army just as much as the sudden attack did, if not more. Oh, there were certainly enemy shamans, or magi as they called themselves, on the other flanks, but none came even close to the sheer destruction brought by what Sayakar guessed was the enemy war chief. And now that destruction was moving their way, his shaman curses and rushes to her apprentices, and as if that was not enough. War chief, one of his runners rushed to him, panic in his eyes. He nearly growled but held himself back. That kind of thing would be counterproductive now. What? He asked even as he signaled his subordinate chiefs to gather round. Another enemy force appeared between us and the city. The runner exclaimed far too loudly, "We are completely cut off." What? Sayakar scowled. Do we know who they are? The runner twitched in fear. Metal beasts and shamans, war chief. Sayakar's eyes snapped to one of his subordinates, and the Egg Brother nodded before he even spoke. Have the Salamanders move out to deal with them. The troops in the city should see you and crush them between you. The chieftain saluted and ran off to his mount. Now, Sayakar grinned. Even he swore he could hear another group of his kin be incinerated. We prepare an ambush. Indaril Nerevar, a name he carried throughout all his lifetimes, tore yet another Argonian with sunder, breaking him in half with his immense strength and braining his comrade with his armored fist, stepping back a moment later as Anandor cut through the throat of yet another of their mages. He and the Snow Elf, and was that not a thought he never believed he would think, were cutting through the enemy ranks with such efficiency that the halberdiers that followed them barely had to do any work, leaving most of the true fighting to them and their crossbow-armed fellows. Oddly enough, at least to Nerevar, they did not seem to mind the lack of glory one bit, especially their commander, who he learned was rather laid back in most of the things he did, except when it came to the preservation of his soldiers' lives. Then he became another person in his entirety. Nerevar found that he could respect that. These were after all different times. The automaton Dagoth left with them stayed behind the lines, using numerous scrolls to keep the firestorm effect going, even as more and more of the Argonians rushed into what they knew was certain death. Nerevar found he could most certainly not respect that, even as one of the fools managed to survive a strike to the chest from his hammer, which only bought him a moment of suffering further as he was stabbed by a halberd once Nerevar simply stepped past him. Soon after having waded through thousands of the fools, they reached their destination and found the large opening in the center of the camp to be filled to the brim with heavily armored Argonians, accompanied by their mages. Their leader, who was mounted atop a quadrupedal lizard just as heavily armored as he, stepped out in front of their band with his spear raised. "Which one of you calls himself Hortator?" he asked challengingly. Nerevar grinned at the decoy, nearly chuckling at the irony of it all, and then he blasted him with lightning. Chapter 4, 148, Chapter 67, Lightning Strike, Part 2 out of 2. Almeril Farin felt oddly at peace as his kinsfolk followed him through the sea of tents and shacks that was the Argonian encampment. His heart beat with a purpose he did not know in his lifetime. His shield protected his comrades who advanced on the enemy with the same vigor as they did when the battle started, and his blade sang through the air as it cut down yet another worthy foe. The Argonian's leather and scale armor failing to protect its vitals as it clutched at its throat. He kicked the beast into its comrade, his blade flashing out and stabbing it in its throat as it stumbled, and like so many times before, he stepped over yet another corpse. It was a beautiful kind of monotony to the Redoran warrior, only amplified by the blessing of Boethia, who even now directed the smallest glance his way, her approval guiding his blade to cut and cut and cut. So inured was he in this righteous slaughter that he did not even notice the moment the last worthy enemy fell, and what few still stood fled with their tails between their legs. He took one short breath and centered himself, save in. He called out, "Losses." His second-in-command took a bit of time to clean the blood from his eyes before answering, 12 dead and 70 heavily injured. "The beasts are bleeding us." Farin realized it was slow, but it was starting to become noticeable. Still, the Hortator was ready for this. First lines fall back and recuperate, second and third lines with me. His brothers in arms looked hesitant, but the plan was clear. Fulmer healers would follow each battle group and provide healing to the most critical, while the healthy ones rested and protected their comrades. He would be given no such privilege, especially since he would never ask for it. Instead, he took out a stamina potion with some minor regenerative properties and downed it in one swift gulp. Farin winced at the taste and let out an exhale, already moving as to not give his body time to start locking up under the strain. "Warriors of Morrowind." He called forward. A fresh wall of shields and blades replaced the one he had spent, and soon they marched on. The guiding light of their sovereign's assault informing them just how far they could go without overextending. Everything was going as planned, and then they stepped into another clearing, where a makeshift barricade wall awaited them. Farin scowled below his helm as he quickly counted the numerous Argonians hissing and growling at him from atop their defensive positions, already certain rushing the wall would cost him far too many of his brothers' lives. It was good then that the Redoran did not fight alone on this day, Carvani. He called. The diminutive Telvanni wasted no time and bodily pushed his way through the ranks of warriors blocking his path. An Argonian archer must have noticed his robes, heavily armored as they were, for the moment he stepped forward a hail of arrows was loosed at him. The small Dunmer grinned, showing of his far too dense rows of sharp and narrow teeth, and swung out, casually throwing the arrows aside and grasping with his other hand. A large runic circle formed in front of him, and almost too quickly for Farin to see it, a massive fireball slammed into the wall, followed soon by a wave of wind that made the flames jump at the now panicked defenders. Humph! The Telvanni huffed and turned back without a word. Almaril Farin fell upon the routing enemy without a moment's hesitation, and soon he was once more back in that delightful haze of battle, knowing that even should he die on this day, his life would have been a worthy one. Savos Aran felt an eye roll coming for the 10th time since he was attached to assist the Archmagister in blocking off the approach to Mournhold. "You aren't going to discover anything. I hope you know that." The Telvanni lord scoffed, even as the spider automaton he was tinkering with zapped him for trying to unbolt a specific latch. "Just you wait, Aran. I will succeed, and then I will be the one laughing." "You know, Raven might actually be right." Savos spoke up after a moment. The Telvanni finally looked up. "Right about what?" Before Savos could rightly call the older elf a mechanophiliac, their attention was drawn by rapid armored steps as the form of Dagoth Ulthis rushed to them. "My lords!" The elf saluted, enemy cavalry approaching from the southeast. "So they finally noticed, did they?" Demnavani quirks an eyebrow. "Took them long enough." "We better prepare a proper welcome for them then," Savos says with a smirk before looking back to the unmourned tribesmen. "Tell Abasil and Vassilor to keep facing the city. We don't want to be caught in a pincer attack." The Urshilaku and Erabanimson Ashkans had already managed to throw off a few disorganized sallies from the ensorcelled city, but something told Savos it would be wiser if he made sure they didn't suddenly abandon their posts in the excitement. The younger elf saluted and ran off. "Come on then, Baladas," Savos called as he began walking. "You can go back to fondling the toys later." He didn't bother hiding his grin as the older elf sputtered in indignation. Irazir spurred his salamander forward, even as the beast startled whenever a new explosion of fire came. His heart beat with barely suppressed fear, but he allowed none of it to show as he became the example for his fellow riders to follow. A loud ringing noise made him look north, and he saw yet another position get pelted with large crossbow bolts, the hastily assembled barricades getting thrown about, as moments later, black armored greyskins armed with halberds surged through, cutting down his egg brothers without mercy. He focused back on his task, rising his spear and crying out a loud war cry for his kin to follow. They could not save the ones currently suffering, but giving the small garrison in the city an opening to strike would make their deaths worthwhile. Soon the enemy came into sight, barely hidden by the edges of the mist that took hold of the city, and a small force of armored greyskins revealed themselves, all of them heavily armored but also lacking any polearms. Irizir grinned maliciously as he couched his long spear and prepared for a charge. He felt a small bit of hesitation as the enemy formation failed to startle at their approach. The salamanders were larger than the horses the humans used, so they should have. The chieftain shook his head and focused on his task, spurring his mount onwards and once more bellowing a war cry that was immediately joined by his brothers in arms. And then it happened. A bored-looking greyskin stepped out of the formation, bearing the vestments of their dread shamans. As if stepping on a bug, he rose his leg and stomped on the ground. In the next instant, Irizir felt himself utterly disoriented as everything turned wrong. The ground was suddenly above him, and his mount now faced the skies. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed another one of their shamans step out and make a clutching motion. His instincts screamed and spikes of earth burst from the ground, cruelly impaling numerous salamanders and Argonians, throwing Irizir aside and doing much the same for his mount. The chieftain screamed as he felt both his legs crack under the weight of his now dead companion. He tried moving, he tried throwing the weight off, and when that failed, he tried clawing his way out. It was all for naught, and soon an armored figure stood above him, its black plate armor emblazoned with a three-eyed beetle. Irizir was almost relieved when the greyskin granted him a swift death. Things were not going terribly well for one Alandro Indaril, as he was once more forced to close a gap in his formation by his lonesome, his magicka long since having been spent on pushing the enemy back, and his potions were either consumed or left smashed upon the bloody mud. His knights started the battle out well, aiding their Telvanni allies in punching through the enemy and being an unbreakable wall as their mage comrades slaughtered the beastly invaders. With each force they threw back and each beast they slew, their aggression and boldness grew. It was when that boldness grew too great that their folly was made apparent. Before he even noticed, the Indaril was cutting through enemy ranks far too quickly, his knights following with zeal in their hearts, even as the Telvanni mages warned them of overextension. Those very mages were the first to die to his mistake, for as they pushed through yet another narrow corridor of shacks, they failed to notice a clearing to their side, hidden by a wall of tarps as it was. And as they clashed with the wall of shields and clubs that awaited them, a force of agile Argonians burst from their hidden position, killing the Telvanni with poisoned blades. Alandro managed to avenge them mere moments later, but even as his spear feasted on more blood than it ever had, he knew he had made a mistake, and bitterly began a fighting retreat, leaving behind body after heavily armored body of his brothers in faith. As if smelling the weakness, the lizard men threw themselves forward, uncaring for injury or death, as they nearly pushed against each other to see who would deliver the killing blow in vengeance. The spears of his brothers drank just as much as his own, but it was not enough, for no matter how many they killed, it would seem there would be more to replace them. And when he heard hissing war cries behind him, the recently ascended Lord of the Indaril knew he would die this day. He commanded his brothers in faith to hold the front while he alone went to face the rear charge. He made a prayer to Azura and to Boethia, and even one to Mephala, useless as it may have seemed. The first Argonian leapt at him with reckless abandon, and he made to impale him for his trouble. But he stilled as he heard the telltale sound of a crossbow loosing its bolt, and no lizards used such weapons. The Argonian above him twitched and fell, and was set ablaze, and his fellows soon followed, as the crossbowman seemingly needed no reload for his weapon, and was soon joined by more marksmen of lesser but still mighty armaments. In mere moments, the rear attack had been cleared out, and the form of Alandro's saviors was revealed. "You good there, Indaril?" Davos Dagoth asked aloud, even as his white-cloaked subordinates rushed to help Alandro's knights. The Grand Ascendant breathed out in relief and nodded. "I thank you for your timely arrival, Sarah." Suddenly, Davos twitched and loosed a bolt from his crossbow one-handed, catching another ambushing Argonian as she tried backstabbing one of his own. "We can exchange thanks later." The right hand of Dagoth spoke, "There are still Argonians to get rid of." With a satisfying crack, the last of Nerevar's foes fell limp before him, his body sundered to pieces as his magical staff fell to the ground uselessly, right next to the other dozen or so of his fellow mages. The once Hortator took a long breath of the bloody air and turned to the rest of his band. "Did we get them all?" "We did," Anandor answered as he pulled his sword out of a corpse, Akulakan. The automaton ever so slightly turned his way, meatbag. "Kindly check for traps," the tired Falmer instructed. Without another word, the mechanical being summoned a large ward that seemed to push against the corpses briefly before ignoring them, thoroughly shaking the surface level of the ground below them. "Clear," he called out after a moment. "Bloody rune traps," Nerevar muttered. He never liked those things. "How is the lad?" He asked Varan. One of their comrades got his legs blown off by a rune trap with such power it burst the eye of the elf next to him. The captain of the Sworn Mer scowled, gave him a high regeneration potion. "He will live." It was exactly at this moment that a group of white-robed Falmer and their guards stepped into the field-turned pile of corpses and began checking on everyone without a singular care of their complaints. "What are our instructions after dealing with the ambush?" Nerevar asked Varan. The masked elf shrugged. "Flank the closest fight and keep on killing. Lizards should be heavily panicking by now, so we are waiting for his grace to do what he plans." "Does he often fly off in the middle of a battle?" Nerevar couldn't help but ask. The Sworn Mer chuckles. "He does, but we've learned to trust he knows what he is doing." A healer approached Nerevar, and just as he was about to protest, the woman directed him with such a glare, even his ancient soul felt slightly shaken. After letting himself be patched up like a good boy, they were once more on the march, and minutes later they were slamming into yet another enemy formation. Surrounded by rivers of blood as he was, Nerevar felt right at home. Sayakar nodded as yet another report reached him. "Send another detachment of salamanders around the left flank. That ought to give them pause." The runner nodded and ran off. He looked to the group of shamans next to him. "Sound a fighting retreat after the next clash. We will consolidate our force and counterattack before the enemy can rest." "And what of our losses?" the shaman asks with a frown. He holds back a growl. "Was it not you who said the Hist demands the greyskins be struck down?" The shaman winces. "Well, yes, but nothing." Sayakar scowls. "You will do as you are told, or my patience for your arrogance will reach its end." The woman looked like she wanted to protest, but chose better. And that is how the next hour of the battle went by, with Sayakar receiving reports, giving orders, and reorganizing his flagging army. The Greyskins had cut down many thousands of his egg brothers today, but they failed to crush their morale into a full rout, which gave Sayakar the chance to avenge himself, even if he knew he was not likely to survive the counterattack he planned on leading himself. Sometimes death was necessary to bring victory, and he would win. There was no other way. Sadly, the world had other plans. Suddenly everything turned utterly silent, and Sayakar heard a light thud behind him. His blood chilled, and he slowly turned around. And what he saw made his eyes narrow into pinpricks. An imposing figure, crowned and armored in black and purple, with a red sash across their chest, and a bird of golden fire on their shoulder, and currently holding the eviscerated form of his most powerful shaman. It took him only a moment longer to realize all his officers had been killed in that very same instant, their wounds looking like a giant punched through them and leaking copious amount of blood. I will admit, the move was the correct one, almost had me stepping in more thoroughly. The creature spoke even as it threw the shaman's body aside like a wet rag. "You did everything perfectly, made all the right decisions." "What are you?" Sayakar hissed and grasped his sword. The thing paused and tilted its head. "Did you not get my message?" Sayakar's chilled blood began boiling with rage. "Oh, don't blame me. Your folks just couldn't leave well enough alone." The thing laughed at him. "Still, my thanks for the opening. Becoming Hortator would have been much harder without such a blatant threat." Unwilling to listen to any more of this drivel, the war chief lunged, or at least he attempted to, as he found himself unable to move, feeling like he was stuck too deep in water to move at all. "It is funny," the thing chuckled. not even looking winded by holding him in place. From where you are twitching helplessly, this must look oh so incredibly unlucky. The truth is, its red eyes shone with amusement as both it and the bird spoke. The game was rigged from the start. And then all was gold. Divaithfire looked up from his book as a massive explosion of golden fire lit up the sky at the back of the Argonian encampment. He snorted, shook his head, and got back to reading Insane Bloody Children. "Shouldn't we do something?" An elf who he forgot was standing next to him asked. Fear looked up, barely managing to remember the name of Merin Zadir, and waved him off. "Go ahead then, shoo. They should be running like headless chicken now, so you might get some glory if you hurry up." Merin scowled at the ancient sarcasm, but took his advice to heart nonetheless, swiftly organizing the Sadras marksmen and his own Dres border wardens and calling on Furious's light cavalry. Fire once more rolled his eyes and brought them to his book, all the while channeling the massive mist ritual practically on his own. He wound never voiced it, but getting to cast some grand spells once more was rather refreshing after millennia of stillness. Who knew the child might even prove worthy of his more direct support? He nearly chuckled at the thought, all in good time. Chapter 4, 149. Chapter 68, Folly, Fear, and Courage. Raven's point of view. Groans of the wounded surround me on all sides, the constant noise of new casualties being brought in, barely cutting through the constant wailing. The mixed smell of blood piss and shit did not help either. Getting rattled in the helm with a club did not leave one in good control of one's body. And promptly suppressing those senses. "Let's see here," I mutter as I scan the barely living elf below me. Numerous broken bones, a punctured lung, half-snapped neck, ground-up knees, and a busted eye. All in all, a hellish state. I ignore the wince of the next tome and blast the wounded with a wave of restoration. He should live. A pair of Falmer healers drag the trampled elf away, and I look up to my current companion, who still refused to meet my eyes. "What do I do with you, Alandro?" I ask with a mildly theatric sigh. The Grand Descendant looked like he wanted to sink into the dirt and forever be forgotten as he spoke. "I offer no excuses, Hortator. You offer no excuses and thus throw all your guilt at my feet." I scoff. Not a terrible decision when one fucks up. All he does is bow his head deeper. Davos, who was standing a few steps away, shuffles a bit before speaking up. "He still did his job, right? Playing good cop to my bad cop, eh?" "He did." I nod, and Alandro wisely does not react. But he still wasted near 300 warriors and 6 respectably potent mages due to his arrogance. Honestly, I make a show of sighing. After that showing, I may as well send you back to Necrom. We do need our logistical lines bolstered. Finally, his head snaps up with such speed, he nearly breaks his neck and his eyes widen. He nearly speaks up, but bites his words down. Him returning home in shame would be political murder at this point. "I don't know, boss." Davos steps up and pats the poor Indoril on the back. He is still new to this. Fuck-ups are to be expected. "Not when lives are in question," I immediately retort. A bit hypocritical of me, since I still refuse to just wipe armies off the map, I know. But this was this, and that was that. Davos pretends to hesitate before nodding and backing away. I pause, cupping my chin as if pondering for a long moment, before suddenly pointing at Alandro, causing him to flinch minutely. "Tell you what." His eyes brighten with hope, like a drowning man clutching at straws. "Since this was your first offense, I will give you an option to redeem yourself." He kneels immediately. "Command me, Hortator." "We will be storming the city soon enough." I begin, and since it has been getting colonized for a while, there are bound to be both Argonian and Dunmer civilians within. Your task is to ensure that they come to minimal harm possible. Soldiers not being given mercy was something I could tolerate. Indiscriminate murder of civilians was something I would punish. He looks like he wants to ask something, and I wave for him to speak up. "Forgive me, my lord, but how am I to stop the others from committing undue harm?" "You act under my orders," I say gravely and summon a scroll, rapidly scribbling down my orders. "They will not disobey." The weight of his task strikes him, and he lowers his head once more. I will not fail you. See that you do not, I state with finality, or I will have Scorch, said Phoenix materializes on my shoulder, deliver you to Necrom personally. Scorch chirps a chuckle that is somehow both melodious and menacing. Go ahead, little Indoril, make my day. Alandro balks at Scorch, but quickly straightens his posture and he takes the scroll with a firm nod. I will go and inform my troops. Do so. I dismiss him and he leaves. You sure you didn't overdo it, boss? Davos asks, his posture utterly lazy. My facade of seriousness disappears and I shrug. Best make the lesson stick before he fucks up beyond all reckoning. He grunts in agreement. You want me to do something extra before we go in? I pause. Just basic search and destroy. You know your work better than I. He chuckles. Whatever you say, boss. Thus satisfied, he follows me as I step outside our temporary tent. Dressing a great lord down in front of hundreds, not to mention a peer of his, would have been quite bad, even if it was far less dangerous than sending him away. He should have learned his lesson anyway. Farron, I greet the elf currently seated atop a crate, whose entire being practically radiated annoyance. I could almost feel him internally pouting. How are you recovering? He frowned slightly. I need no recovery after some light fighting, my lord. My eyebrow rises as I look him up and down. The madman had forcefully drawn himself back from near blackout levels of exhaustion multiple times today. And while he absolutely murdered the Argonians on his flank, he had also nearly poisoned himself to death with how many potions he consumed. He looks like he wants to say something in protest, but gets a grip and exhales. Apologies, I may have lost myself a bit, he admits awkwardly. And I can understand that, especially with that little blessing you have going on. He twitches but isn't surprised, but that should not come at a cost to your discipline. He stills for a moment before ever so slowly lowering his gaze. I beg forgiveness for this shameful display. You shamed no one. I wave him off. Just take care of yourself or else your men might be left without your guidance. He accepts the order easily enough. By your will. Now, I don't doubt your e-grounding, he grumbles as I change the subject, has kept you from keeping informed. What is the current state of the battlefield? I may have taken only 15 minutes to save the near-dead, but during a battle that may as well be a day, and that was only when I was assured the enemy was in a complete rout. His back straightens, and he reports, Legate Furious's cavalry has reached the eastern edge of the city. No sorties. The Ashlanders have pushed past the south, small attacks repelled easily, but they were forced to stop any further pursuit to repel them. Sadras has repositioned to the north, one sudden sortie repelled with middling losses. Redoran, Dress, and Dagoth are pursuing the retreating enemy at large, no notable setbacks as of yet. Indoril has withdrawn to the west of the city to recover and joined Telvanni, no sorties. And we were currently just behind the western siege line. I nod along with each statement. Pretty good so far. How organized is the enemy retreat? He frowns consideringly. Some 35 of their cohort equivalents, claws I believe I heard one call them, are retreating in good order and covering their flanks, while the rest are fleeing in a panic. If I had to estimate, I'd say some 20,000 Argonians will manage to break off if we focus on hunting the cowards as efficiently as possible. A great success then, I grin. I will have to send my freshest troops to hound them so they get no rest. In fact, oi Scorch, the little phoenix perks up. Yeah, Pops? You want to go terrorize the poor retreating farm tools once Mournhold is ours. He does not respond, but I can feel him practically vibrating in excitement at the idea. Almeril doesn't seem to have noticed my momentary distraction. Without your grand showing, they would have held for much longer. I thank you in the name of my men. They are my men now too, I point out. He gives me a tiny but genuine smile. Smirking back at him, my gaze turns to the large crater in the distance. They moved their entire command structure back south. It was even more concentrated than when we first attacked. Cut off the snake's head and terrify its heart. He praises a target too difficult to ignore. And then he frowns. And a possible trap. Traps are always possible, Almeril. I nod, but one should not be too afraid to move when he knows they are distinctly improbable. Caution should not cease action, merely guide it. he seems to recite. Indeed, I smirk. Hopefully our losses are not too grievous. I'd like us back on the chase as quickly as possible. Almeryl's eyes shine with a now contained hunger for battle. They will regret ever stepping foot into our lands. That they will, Almeryl. That they will. I mutter and scan the battlefield just in case of surprises. I find none. Getting myself back into the game, I start walking away, not before giving him another order. Rest up, Redaran. You are in the reserve until you recover fully. Ignoring his further pouting, I move to join Savos and Balladas, both of whom were currently standing in front of the still mist-covered gates and discussing the spell with Divaith. The same bloody madman who modified my spell and made it disorient everyone inside. How very cheeky. General POV. The small Dunmer boy nearly stumbled as he narrowly avoided a group of Argonian guards, their mist-addled brains too slow to notice him as he slunk down familiar streets and away from the madness that had taken them. The mist came hours prior, just as the sun was setting, and from that moment all of the Argonian warriors began acting incredibly twitchy. And then they started grabbing people from the street. Both he and his employer legged it as quickly as possible. The old shopkeep told him the fog was magic and that war had come to the city and he should hide while things settled. Had the time finally come then? Was the question raging in his mind as he evaded another agitated patrol? His friends kept telling him that something big was going on in Morrowind and that soon the lizards would be kicked out. He guessed he would just have to find out. With a final swivel, he ducked into a familiar passage and soon crawled into the street he grew up in, dodging past his neighbors who were as afraid as he was, and immediately rushing to his home and practically slamming the doors behind him. Mavros, his mother snapped. What did I say about slamming the door? Not now, Mom, he snapped back, something he would have been caned for usually, but his panicked look must have saved him. The guards are rounding everyone up. We need to hide. He almost hesitated as he realized he would have to leave his books behind, but the panic let him ignore them. She frowns, all right, and grabs him by the arm. We will hide out with the Garrans. He frowned and stopped, causing her to tug at him. Why would we go to those traitors? He knew they were old family friends, but Hay traded with the Argonians like they were fellow Dunmer. And that was bad. His friends agreed too. She sighs, Mavros, I know you don't like them, but they can help us. He wanted to say no, but his mother's stern look warns him from it. Fine. They left the house, moving past a few of their neighbors still outside, and rushed into another alleyway. Straight into a group of armored Argonians. His mother stilled, and before he knew it, he was stumbling away as she shoved him and told him to run. But the lizard was a cruel one, and grabbed her by the neck, immediately pointing his jagged blade at her chest and hissing, You stay right where you are, Spawn, or she gets it. His snout snapped to his kin, and they hissed something between each other. Mavros was a curious sort, and he managed to catch no kill, start riot, use for later. In between a slew of unrecognizable words, his very soul screamed in terror as his mother's pleading eyes told him to flee, and yet he knew his choice was already made. All right. He didn't resist as one of them walked up to him and grabbed him by the shoulder. The fear turned his mind murky as they were led through the winding streets and only returned to normal when they walked out into the Grand Boulevard right next to the city's western gate. They were rounded up as hundreds of the city guard formed up behind them and told to stand here and wait. Mavros shook as his mother embraced him from behind, muttered assurances. He was young, but his mother raised no fool. They were being used as shields and hostages. Suddenly, as if to confirm his thoughts, the mist began lifting and the gates shook. Screams came from atop the wall as metal spiders swarmed over the few archers and javelineers still foolish enough to remain at their posts. The guards tensed, but their captain growled at them in their bestial language, and they held their position. The gates shook again, and with a crack they opened, utterly crushing the large drawbar into tiny little splinters before slamming into the two gate towers and denting themselves into the enchanted brick. A single tall figure stood at the head of a golden shield wall, looking like the visage of the mightiest of Dunmeri sorcerers Mavros had read about in his stories. Stay back. The captain of the city guard, a large and often cruel Argonian clad in green plate, hissed, Not one step forward, or we will gut these pathetic fools, Greyskin. The sorcerer, his crown hiding his expression save for a pair of blazing red eyes, let out a scoff that shook the air. Humph. The captain went to say something else, but the sorcerer did not bother waiting and simply snapped his fingers, summoning a massive wave of flame that rushed towards them indiscriminately. Mavros shook in his boots as he realized they would simply be incinerated. A simple snap of fingers and their lives would end in a blink. At least, he decided, he would face his death like a proper elf. He shoved his mother behind him, even as he kept trembling, and futilely spread his arms in a vain attempt to stop the fire. Time seemed to slow down as thousands of thoughts assaulted his mind, and he saw all his memories flashing before his eyes. He questioned if the tales were false, and they were destined to suffer under the cold rule of the Argonians. Or even worse, that their northern kin did not care for them and took them as traitors to be snuffed out. Finally, he questioned if his father would have been proud. It did not matter, for before a full second had passed, the flames reached him, and he understood his questions would forever remain unanswered, as he was suddenly surrounded by a sea of gold and orange, the roaring of the flames making him tremble in fear even as he refused to close his eyes. He knew he was already dead, but wasn't death supposed to be more painful? In a blink, the fire disappeared, and he was left utterly lost as he realized he was still alive. His eyes widened as he quickly turned to his mother and found her equally unharmed. He hugged her with dry tears in his eyes, even as she shook in his grip. One quick look around confirmed that no other Dunmer was so much as singed, and being a curious sort, Mavros looked up to where the Argonians were standing, only to gape as he realized all but the captain were dead. The same captain who was currently shaking in fear, and all Mavros could feel at the sight was his fear and terror turning to rage. Without thinking, he stepped around his feeble mother and rushed at the lizard, picking up a spear from the ground that would no doubt boil his unmarred hands, and pushed past his confused neighbors. The heated metal sizzled in his grip, but he ignored it and grabbed it with his other hand as well. And then he leapt at the bastard, only to stop halfway from his target as a single hand easily held him up, hanging uselessly from his clothes. Best not sully yourself needlessly, kid. The same sorcerer was looking down at him with amusement, his voice carrying none of its previous terror. Mavros wanted to say something, but the terrified lizard chose that exact moment to wake from his stupor. You! He pointed at the sorcerer with a shaking hand. Look away now, child, his fellow Mer ordered, and he felt compelled to follow. The moment his sight left the Argonian, he heard a snap and a terrified scream of pain before silence descended once more. He felt himself being set down, and a moment later the smell of blood and burnt flesh hit him. The sorcerer turned to the golden warriors following him. Leave a force to protect these Mer and have the healers check on them, the rest of you with me. By your will, Hortator. The most decorated of the golden masked warriors saluted. Good, they would be safe. No, wait, Hortator. Mavros rounded on his savior, but he had already walked off. And then he realized why he was told to look away as he saw what the captain had become. A tree of thin orichalcum and bone branches and leaves of lizard skin and meat. Mavros promptly lost his breakfast. Raven's point of view. I pause as I realize what had just happened behind me. I have gone a bit far there. Scorch appears on my shoulder and lazily blasts an Argonian trying to sneak up on us from atop a roof with a bolt of fire, incinerating him instantly. All hail the great Hortator, slayer of Argonians and traumatizer of children. Smiling awkwardly to hide a wince, I bravely redirect our attention. Come on then, Scorch, the vermin won't clean itself out. Finally, some fucking action. He chirps angrily and leaps into the skies. I almost pitied the poor fuckers he sicked himself at. Almost. Now then. My eyes narrow as I feel my gaze drawn to the center of the city. That is a pretty neat little sapling you have there. Chapter 450. Chapter 69. Mournhold. Raven's point of view. My march to the ancient capital's core did not slow down save for the short altercation at the gate, even as hundreds of Argonians tried ambushing me at different moments, either bearing my path with their soon-to-be corpses or actually attempting to flank me in the case of the slightly smarter ones. They burned all the same in the end. Why, the catharsis of taking it out on them almost made up for the state of the city itself, especially after their little showing at the gate. Taking hostages was such a shit tactic. A scowl was on my face the whole time. The streets were winding, and many of the buildings large enough to be called manors. But while the Argonians may have maintained the infrastructure for their needs and spared some of the original populace so as to not draw attention, they did not even pretend to bother maintaining the city itself, leaving it all to the people themselves, and no doubt sabotaging their efforts whenever a particularly prickly lizard came to command. To be expected, really. Without any mental input, my right hand flicks up and yet another group of idiots get turned into fertilizer, just as Davos slinks out from a nearby shadow, startling the absolute shit out of the Indoril infantry following me and falling in next to me. "Find anything of interest?" I ask as the walled-off inner city comes into view. "Just a bunch of locals who heard rumors and armed themselves in advance." Davos answers lazily, "Had them gather the civvies and pull them away while we clean the place up." With an approving hum, I focus back on the road and the distant gates of the city currently being breached or opened from within, and my own troops rushing in without any true resistance, save for small groups of stubborn Argonians. Speed bumps, really, and they would not be adding up, not anytime soon. The true battle was already long since won, now it was time for a cleanup. But that was not my focus for this excuse of a siege, for while the outer city may have been a winding mess, built up over the course of thousands of years and filled to the brim with all manner of friendly and less friendly individuals, the inner city was comparatively tiny, built within a circular fashion with 4 distinct sections all connected to the central palace of Almalexia, and distinctly lacking in friendlies at that. But most importantly, from the southernmost section of Almalexia's little gated community, now sprouted a distinctly alien tree, massive and imposing. Well, alien for Morrowind at least. It was, after all, far too green. "Huh," I mutter as I cup my chin. Never thought I'd see a fat Argonian. Davos doesn't bother holding back a facepalm as the little lizard man begs for his life. With a sigh of disappointment, I flick my hand up, and he finally shuts up. So I turn to sole trio of individuals who may have some actual answers for me and point at the big 3 that now stood where a fountain and a pair of statues once did. "What do you think this thing is meant to do?" The inner city felt within minutes, a mix of my shades dragging out every single defender their undermanned little fort still had, and my more offensive magic saw them all falling before they could so much as try and realize how fucked they were. "It looks distinctly like a tree to me." Savos deadpans. "The picture of wit, Aaron." Balladas drawls to my grandfather's grand amusement and throws in his own 2 septims. "It certainly feels magical. I'd say maybe a wide-scale ward anchor. It does seem to be having an effect on its surroundings, that much is certain." One would have to be blind not to notice the abundance of distinctly foreign plant life surrounding this entire section of the inner wall, and the closer to the tree it came, the more lively it all seemed. Well, that and the magical aura was all over the place, even if it did not employ usual Tamrielic spellcraft. It is obviously a way for them to make it more comfortable for their peons. Fire points out, while lazily levitating next to us, the moisture in the air feels far more present than I ever remember it being. My eyes narrow. So a potential positive then? Probably not. Fire shrugs to the immediate relief of the other 2. It could potentially possess a slew of detrimental functions we are unaware of. This is just a preliminary examination. The trio starts to discuss it between themselves, and the moment their attention leaves me, another voice makes itself known. It is known as a hist hub descendant. Do not trust it. "Care to elaborate?" I mutter. "It is a young plant, no shit connected to the hist itself, and used to expand their sphere of influence whenever they seek to expand. This one is far too small and recent to give them any true access, and you should cut it down before it grows further." My lip twitches upwards. "Scared of a little plant, Vorin?" For a moment it seems like he isn't going to answer, but just as I am about to shake his lantern awake, he does. "Your power and victories are going to your head. Do not underestimate creatures who have survived a world cycle." Point. I chuckle and cup my chin. A thought occurs. What if I were to use its connection to the hist to give them a little smack? Foolish. Dagoth answers instantly, the Hist is made up of a number of interconnected demigods, all of whom are mentally powerful. You may be strong, but they would crush your mind if you gave them a chance. Why would I have to connect my mind to it? I frown, because the Hist does not use magic directly, only their alien minds and distinct forms of life. He lectures, the magic the hub uses is simply ambient magicka twisted into the enemy's purpose. If you were to somehow trace the mental connection back, all you would be doing is burning a few trees. The Hist would remain untouched. That makes some sense at least. I surrender the point, but still might be useful for research. I can feel the disembodied soul frowning at me before the trio of eyes suddenly brighten. Did you not see the state of your fellow Dunmer once you entered the city? I did, I nod. They were rather malnourished. Incorrect. I stare down at the lantern. Explain. The hub makes life increasingly difficult for all non-Hist-related life around it, taking energy from them and redirecting it to its own purposes one bit by tiny bit. It takes me a moment to even accept his words as a possibility, but the moment I do, the air around me shudders and a flaming blasphemy appears in my hand, and I hiss, and now I have all the justification I needed. The fact you need any offends me. Without bothering to respond, I channel Blasphemy's Vorpal effect into my spell and aim exactly at the Hist connection with Void's blink. The sword is brought down, and the tree is drowned in crimson lightning, breaking utterly and leaving behind naught but ash. A shudder passes through the air, and I see the plants around it wilt slightly, their full decay no doubt to follow in the coming months. The trio of Archmagi round on me, Savos looking utterly unsurprised, Demnevani looking startled, and Fear looking a bit miffed at the loss of test subject. Just pick some of the plants up. I deadpan at the latter, should have the same origin. He scoffs, but does go to grab some. What was that? Demnevani asks, holding back a hiss. Did we not agree we would discuss this? Large-scale drain spell. I shrug. Who knows how much power it potentially stored? The Telvanni Archmagister grumbles to himself before shrugging, fine, so long as I am no longer needed here, and walks off towards what was once Almalexia's palace, no doubt hoping to find some of Sotha Sil's writings she pilfered. Savos just sacks his head. I doubt that the tree could have done much on its own, no matter how powerful. Interesting shamans? He nods. Most likely. Odd that they did not have one present then, I mutter. Savos clears his throat, drawing my raised eyebrow. Rave in. He points at the corpse below me. That was the shaman. I blink. Oh. How the hell was I supposed to know they left a literal novice to use the death tree? He just laughs and walks off to explore. A sudden thought comes to my mind, consuming it wholly. Seriously though, Hist Hub, very creative naming sense there, Gramps. There is a more proper name the farm tools use in their filthy little language. He fires back, and while I am fluent in gel, I only am such so that I can actively refuse to speak it instead of merely not knowing how. My lips twitch upwards. What an absolute cunt. You aren't so bad after all, old man. Scorch materializes atop Ur's lantern and settles into his new perch, completely ignoring the ensuing complaints. General POV. On the noon of the second day of the reconquest of Mournhold, the city had been brought to a semblance of order, and the time came for its new overlord to dole out reward and punishment in equal measure. Nerevar yawned as he listened to his successor assign tasks to everyone and judge the admittedly rather small number of fools who had crossed the line to the point of being brought straight before him. He was rather lenient by the ancient elf's standards, but he supposed being publicly chastised by the new Hortator, having your pay stripped and getting assigned a flogging for some basic pillaging would be just as bad as simply getting your head lopped off. And it just had to be one of his. It was all in all a rather simple affair as he understood it. The city guards were slain to a man, or beast he supposed, and the civilians were spared for the most part, unlike their possessions. The locals and soldiers both grumbled, but after little Dagoth dressed the 10th poor fool down, they shut their mouths and learned to obey someone capable of making them wish death with mere words. The once leader of Indoril shook his head and left what had once been the Brindisi Dorum Plaza of Almalexia's vanity project. and descended into the city proper. He found it odd that he could even recognize a few of the streets, even if the buildings themselves had long since been changed, and the roads paved and repaved over and over and over again. What once were circular wooden shacks were now great square manors of stone, all of them circled with what were no once majestic gardens, even if the small plots of land now grew barren and the stone was taken by moss. His home had certainly come far from that little town from his childhood memories. But what is a home without the people? He found himself muttering, an odd look in his eyes. So much time had passed, and even when faced with his memories and his home, he still found himself feeling like he did not belong. Like he should just hide and wait the new ages out and give way for greater names than the relic that was Nerevar take front stage. Or at least he would have felt like that if the forefront of his mind was not overwhelmed with excitement about an actual proper war happening. Sure, the child was too afraid of risking too many casualties, and while the perceived tactical over-conservatism worried him, he still happily went along the plan to just kill everything with the most elite troops they had on hand. He could not even deny the effectiveness, what with each of their own paying for 30 Argonians on average. But that was enough of such thoughts. He had come down here for a reason. The old stone shop, nestled in between a pair of abandoned manors, looked like it had not been opened for centuries at this point, and yet even now it responded to his magicka. His short stint as a Telvanni Archmagister definitely paid off, even if he had to spend an entire life around the madmen. With practiced movement, the spells long since having been ingrained in his mind, once he realized his signature in magic changed with each incarnation, he unlocked the way inside and came upon a small stall flanked by empty displays. He smiled slightly in nostalgia and passed the stall by, descending down a flight of stairs and into the basement. And straight to his true home. Hundreds upon hundreds of potions, glowing with power, greeted him. Even as he examined the crates filled to the brim with expensive ingredients, some of which one could not even find today. His eyes shone as he began packing them. It would not do to not be at his best when the time came.